The Iliad by Homer is the foundational text for all of Western culture. If you're interested in literature or philosophy or history, this poem is your starting point. Every great Western thinker for the last 3,000 years has been influenced by this poem. Alexander the Great carried his copy of the Iliad all around the world with him, and he slept with it under his pillow. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle developed their philosophies in many ways to challenge this poem. The greatest politicians of history, everyone from Julius Caesar to the Medici family to the American founding fathers, all of them knew this poem. To understand the importance of this poem, you can look at the lengths people went to preserve it. For hundreds of years, it was memorized and recited aloud, all 16,000 lines of it. For 1,000 years after that, it was hand-copied. Scholars came together at the famous Library of Alexandria to reconcile the different hand copies floating around the world to make an official version of the Iliad. And when Constantinople fell and knowledge of the Greek language had almost disappeared, scholars still believed in the importance of this document. And they were right. They carried manuscripts from Istanbul to Venice, where the Iliad and a handful of other Greek texts kicked off the Renaissance. There's a painting in the Louvre called The Apotheosis of Homer, which shows Homer, the author of the Iliad, being deified by the winged goddess of victory. The French painter, Ingres, included 46 other people in this scene. And if you look closely at their faces, you see that these are 46 of the most famous artists, authors, philosophers, and politicians of all time. The painting is showing them all paying respect to Homer because their own work is built on his. Most people are assigned the poem in school, and a lot of people struggle to get through it. They're assigned an antiquated translation, or they don't have someone to guide them through it. And that was me when I was in high school and in university. My hope with this video is to give you all the context you need to enjoy this poem. I'm going to guide you through it book by book. The key to this poem is that we have to approach it with a similar context to the people who heard it performed live all those years ago. Homer doesn't know who we are. He wrote it for ancient Greeks. So to understand it, we have to step into their shoes. So in this guide, I'm going to bring in all the other Greek myths and histories that you need to know. So we have all the context in one place to get the most out of this poem and to read it like a Greek would. And the author, Homer, helped us out on the first page. Everything you need to know about the Iliad you can get from a careful reading of the first 8 lines. I'll do 3 lectures in this video. I'll introduce you to the Iliad, then we'll spend a while dissecting the first 8 lines of the poem, and then I'll guide you through each of the poem's 24 books. And I'll put chapter markers below in case you want to skip around. Let's start with the title. The word Iliad means a poem about Ilium, which is the Greek word for Troy. So in modern English, Iliad means a poem about Troy. Scholars have debated this question. What is the Iliad about? One camp really believes it's a poem about Troy, more specifically the destruction of Troy. And as we get into the poem, we'll see the significance of this, that Troy is Zeus's favorite city. And even though Troy isn't actually Greek, it's Anatolian in modern-day Turkey, it's still a model Greek city. And the city, the Greek polis, was the nexus of Greek life. To destroy a city is to destroy an entire civilization, and the Iliad captures the enormity of that tragedy. The other camp thinks the first line of the poem sums it up better. Rage goddess, sing the rage of Achilles. That this is a poem about rage, because the plot of the Iliad is driven entirely by the rage of Achilles. After Achilles feuds with his king Agamemnon, he refuses to help his fellow soldiers in battle, and they're slaughtered. But when Achilles returns to the fight, he turns their fortunes around in an instant. Just as the fortunes of men in the Iliad depend on the whims of the god, so too do they depend on the rage of Achilles. Is he raging with you or against you? The rage of this one man will be decisive and seal the fate of the Greeks and the Trojans. The poem is about both of those things. It's about the fall of Troy, it's about the rage of Achilles, and of course, it's about so much more. It's about the human experience of friendship, love, and heartbreak. It's the most incredible depiction of war. It's about force. It's about the free will of man within the confines of fate. More than anything I've read, this poem captures the totality of human experience. The Iliad isn't a true story, though, but there was a Trojan War. Homer describes an area by the Hellespont as Troy, and excavations of this area have turned up bronze armor and weapons. And Thucydides, an ancient Greek historian writing a few centuries after Homer, believed there was a real war fought between Achaea and Troy. But there's no evidence of the specific characters in the story, or any of the fantastical events in the poem, like Achilles fighting a river god. The ancient Greek people did believe in this story, though. Even the most skeptical Greeks, like the philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who came a few hundred years after Homer, they would have been skeptical of the ridiculous elements, like Zeus shapeshifting into an eagle. But they recognized the Olympian gods and their role in human affairs, and they believed in the historicity of these characters, like Achilles and Agamemnon. The Iliad isn't a religious document, but it is a creation myth. It's a founding memory of the Greek people. And the Harvard classicist Bernard Knox captures this in his introduction to the Penguin Classics edition. For the Greeks, history began with a splendid pan-Hellenic expedition against an Eastern foe, led by kings and including contingents from all the more than 150 places listed in the Catalogue in Book 2. History began with a war. That was an appropriate beginning. For the Greek city-states, from their first appearance as organized communities until the loss of their political independence, were almost uninterruptedly at war with one another. The Greek polis, the city-state, was a community surrounded by potential enemies who could turn into actual belligerents at the first sign of aggression or weakness. The Iliad captures the political realism of ancient Greece. There was no unified Greece like we think of a country today. It was a collection of city-states, each of them jockeying for resources and wealth and power. This was a civilization dominated by power. And just like Zeus rules Olympus through power, and just as these heroes, Agamemnon, Achilles, and Hector, rule with power in the Trojan War, so too did the ancient Greeks rule through power. Athens and Sparta fought a 30-year war against each other. Xerxes marched with an army of 2 million Persians against King Leonidas and the famous 300. The perpetual state of war in the Iliad would have felt relevant to Greeks of any era, many of whom had lived their whole lives in a similar state of war. And I think it's helpful to ground us in the timeline. When we learn about ancient Greece in school, we're almost always learning about this period around 400 BC. This is when city-states like Athens and Sparta and Corinth are so powerful. And it's when famous Greeks like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Pericles are all running around. Homer writes the Iliad and the Odyssey about 300 years before that. The foundational texts of ancient Greece are the Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and 2 poems by Hesiod, which are written around the same time, the Theogony and Works and Days, which I've done a previous video about. The Trojan War, as a historical event, dates about 500 years earlier to 1200 BC. We know essentially nothing about the poem's author Homer, other than he must have lived at some point between the historical Trojan War in 1200 BC and the earliest record of the Iliad in 700 BC. We don't even know if Homer personally wrote down the Iliad. There's actually a lot of people who think that he was blind, a blind bard. There are some academics who don't even think he was a single human being. You sometimes hear scholars talk about the Homeric Question. This is the field of study about who Homer was. The Iliad and the Odyssey were epic poems recited around Greece and Asia Minor by rhapsodes, traveling poets. Each of these rhapsodes performed a different version of the poem, and many of these versions were hand-copied on papyrus until parchment spread widely in the 2nd century AD. Papyrus gets brittle when scrolls get too big, so larger works like the Iliad would have been split into multiple smaller rolls. And it's possible that this is how the Iliad was first split into different books. But it's most likely that the current 24-book version of the Iliad came from the library at Alexandria, with each book corresponding to a different letter in the 24-character Greek alphabet. That labeling system would have made it easier for library staffers to organize the scrolls and to manage the hand copying process. The Greek of the poem is written in a meter, a dactylic hexameter, which is built from 6 metrical units, hexameter. Each unit is either a dactyl or a spondy, but none of the English translations carry through this meter. I use the Robert Fagel's translation, and I love it. I've also read bits from the Pope translation, the Fitzgerald translation, and the Wilson translations. In my reading, I like to prioritize something that is readable, and I think the Wilson translation is probably the easiest read. But I thought it lost too much of the specificity of the poem. I didn't like the use of Greeks instead of Mycenaeans and Achaeans, for example. Homer refers to the same people and the same groups and places by different names throughout the poem, which can be confusing, but it gives the poem its own literary style. And when we get into the guide going book by book, I'll point out a few places where Homer's choice of a different name actually says something and gives a depth of meaning to that passage that I didn't want to give up in translation. So I like that Fagel's keeps that specificity. I can't read Greek, so obviously I can't know for sure, but I love the Fagel's translation. It's readable and it's got style. This Fagel's version that I have comes with a 44-page pronunciation glossary at the back of the book, which includes every name mentioned in the poem. In the English versions of the poem, some of the names are Greek, like Zeus. Some of the names are Latin, like Achilles. The Greek would have been Achilles. And some of the names are completely anglicized, like Troy, which is neither Latin, Troia, nor Greek, Ilium. And I went down this rabbit hole to find out why the names are all over the place. It's because the most famous writers in English, like Shakespeare, knew of the characters in these myths from Virgil's Aeneid and Ovid's Metamorphoses, both of which were written in Latin and were taught to these English poets like Shakespeare when they were school children in Latin. So they grew up hearing Achilles, not Achilles. And with places, especially, English speakers know these places by their English names, like Troy and Athens. So the Old English poets, like Shakespeare, and all modern translators use these anglicized names that are familiar to English readers. Because the translation isn't following a strict meter, the pronunciation of these names doesn't matter too much. But I've tried to use the pronunciation from the glossary wherever possible. We're going to go through each of the 24 books of the Iliad for a close reading. But I think it's helpful for me to tell you the basic 2-minute version of the story in plain English before we start. This is going to make it so much easier to follow along. And it's okay to do this because the Iliad is unspoilable. Because fate plays such an important role in the poem, the gods tell the major characters in the poem when and how they'll die. The second line of the poem tells you Achilles is going to die. So again, there isn't some big surprise or twist that's going to come at the end. The joy of this poem isn't the suspense of what is going to happen. It's the details of how the characters react to what happens. And remember, we want to try and read the poem with the same context as the Greeks. And the Greeks essentially knew the plot of the story from birth. The basic story of Achilles was as widely known by the Greeks as the story of Jesus is to modern-day Christians. So here's the 2-minute story. The Iliad takes place in about 1 month, in the last year of the Trojan War. This war is being fought between the Achaeans, who are the predecessors to who we think of as the Greeks, and they're fighting against the Trojans, who are a civilization living in Troy, a walled city in modern-day Turkey. The trigger of this war is the famous Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in all of history. Helen lives in Sparta with her husband, the chieftain of Sparta, named Menelaus. The Trojan princes Hector and Paris visit Sparta on a diplomatic mission. Paris and Helen are love-struck, and when Paris sets sail back to Troy, he takes Helen with him. Menelaus Helen's husband, is obviously furious. So he goes to his brother, King Agamemnon, who calls together all of his allies to wage war on Troy. The famous 1,000 ships set sail for Troy. This is why poets say that Helen's is the face that launched 1,000 ships. When we start the story in Book 1 of the Iliad, the war has already been going on for 9 years. And we come to the Achaeans, led by King Agamemnon, when they're being destroyed by a plague from the god Apollo. Apollo sends this plague to punish Agamemnon, who has taken a Trojan woman as his war prize, whose father is the Trojan priest of Apollo. Our hero in the story, Achilles, is one of the Achaean chieftains. He summons the other chieftains to an assembly. At this assembly, a prophet tells them that to end Apollo's plague, the girl must be returned to her father. Agamemnon hears that he must give her up, and he demands a replacement woman for his loss. Achilles objects. He says it would be unjust for Agamemnon to take a woman who's already been gifted to any of the men, and that Agamemnon must wait until more war prizes are taken. The two men argue, and Agamemnon decides he will take a girl, Achilles' girl, named Briseis, whom Achilles had grown to seriously love. Achilles thinks of killing Agamemnon right there, but the goddess of wisdom, Athena, stops him. The plague is lifted as soon as the priest's daughter is returned, and Agamemnon takes Achilles' girl, Briseis. Achilles is the son of a sea goddess, Thetis. He complains to his mother about how unfair it is that he's lost Briseis, and how unjust Agamemnon is. And he tells his mother to ask Zeus to inflict pain on Agamemnon and the Achaeans so they'll realize how much they need Achilles. Zeus agrees, and the Trojans, led by Prince Hector, beat the Achaeans all the way back from the walls of Troy to the Achaean ships. Feeling the pain, Agamemnon sends ambassadors to Achilles to offer him gifts if he'll return to the fight. He even offers to give back Achilles' girl, Briseis. Achilles refuses the gifts and refuses to help them. The war goes on, and one by one, the Achaean chieftains are all wounded. Achilles sends his closest friend, Patroclus, to the Achaean camp to see how things are going. Patroclus returns and begs Achilles to join the fight and lead his men, the Myrmidons, into battle. Achilles resists. He won't go himself, but he allows Patroclus to lead the Myrmidons into battle wearing Achilles' armor. The sight of Achilles' armor alone is enough to send the Trojans running. But Patroclus is killed by the Trojan prince Hector, who strips off Achilles' armor and puts it on himself. When Achilles learns of his friend Patroclus' death, he immediately ends his feud with King Agamemnon, and he redirects his rage to the Trojan prince Hector. With new armor, forged by the Greek god of fire, Hephaestus, Achilles rages back into the battle and kills Hector. Achilles ties Hector's corpse to his chariot and drags him through the dirt around the walls of Troy and then back to his tent. Achilles hosts elaborate funeral games in honor of his friend Patroclus, and whenever he feels grief for his friend's death, he drags Hector's body around Patroclus's grave. The gods favor Achilles, but they still respect Hector. They ensure Hector's body doesn't corrupt, and they pressure Zeus for Achilles to release Hector's body. Thetis, Achilles' mother, delivers a message to her son that he is commanded by Zeus to release Hector's body and accept gifts in exchange, and Achilles immediately agrees. But he doesn't expect Hector's father, the Trojan king Priam, to personally come for his son's body. With the help of the gods, King Priam sneaks into Achilles' lodge in the middle of the night to beg for his son's body back. Achilles is reminded of his own father, an old man who will never see his son again, just like Priam. Achilles gives him Hector's body and sends him safely back to Troy, and ensures there's no fighting for 12 days to allow Priam to properly bury his son. The poem ends here, but we know from the prophecies that the fate of Achilles and Troy are sealed. The fighting will resume, Achilles will die, and Troy will fall. Some readers, I think, struggle with the Iliad because they're expecting a clean narrative arc of Achilles, much like the simplified version of the story I just told you. But the Iliad is less linear than that. The narrative is propelled at times by a theme or an object more than it's propelled by any character. And this is part of what makes the poem so much fun. You should think of each of the 24 books of the Iliad like a different episode in a television series. Just like a great TV series, some episodes take us on a detour to follow a different character or to see an event from a different point of view. We do that same thing in some of the books of the Iliad. Some readers skip these detour books entirely because they can't follow them, or because they just can't wait to find out what's going to happen with Achilles and Hector. But each of these episodes gives us something important, and that's why in the guide, I'm not going to skip any of these books. If you want to jump straight into the books, there are timestamps below, but I'm going to really take my time with the first 8 lines of the poem. These lines are so famous because they give us the whole poem. If you understand these first 8 lines, you're going to understand the 16,000 lines that come after them. Rage, goddess. Sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. Murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls. Great fighter souls, but made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds. And the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. Began Muse when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. The first word of this poem is rage. This comes from the Greek menon, and I think this is the most important translation decision in the whole poem. You can translate menon as rage, like Fagles does, or as wrath, like Wilson does, and they're not quite the same. Wrath lends some more justification and premeditation to the fury. Wrath is an emotional fury, channeled at a specific thing. Wrath is purposeful. In the beginning of the Iliad, this would be Achilles' wrath towards Agamemnon, when Agamemnon takes Achilles' girl Briseis. The wrath would show Achilles as a bit more calculating, wanting to inflict pain on Agamemnon. And later in the poem, when Hector kills Patroclus, Achilles would be redirecting that wrath with some clarity of mind away from Agamemnon and to his new enemy, Hector. This wrath gives us Achilles as an active protagonist, someone who has a plan and can channel his anger towards an objective. There are times in the Iliad where this word, wrath, this calculation that it implies, feels right. But still, I prefer rage, as Fagles translates it. This is the explosive, emotional eruption that we see from Achilles. He is a dangerous man. The gods tell us clearly in the poem that Achilles is the most capable warrior alive, and rage heightens that danger. When King Agamemnon takes Briseis, he thinks he's safe because of a social hierarchy. Achilles is a warlord, but Agamemnon is a king, and Agamemnon is protected by his whole army. But Achilles puts his hand on the hilt of his sword and would have killed Agamemnon right there had the gods not intervened. Throughout the poem, we see the irrationality of this rage. We see Achilles completely out of control, raging and behaving in unexpected ways. It keeps all the characters on their toes, and it gives us a real dramatic tension that makes the Iliad a page-turner. And it's not just Achilles. We'll see King Agamemnon, King Priam of Troy, and the gods themselves all at some point be consumed by rage. And we'll see how this rage blinds them. There's no strategy to this war, and we're about to see that the milestones of this war are fated by the gods. We'll see in the poem this unique relationship that each character has with fate. They react to fate in different ways. We'll see these extremely powerful characters who have no control over their lives, ping-ponging around within the guardrails of fate dictated by Zeus. And when a character bumps aggressively against one of these guardrails, they don't like it, but they can't change it. And a natural reaction that we'll see over and over again is an explosion of rage. The second word of the poem, goddess. Rage goddess. Sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. The goddess is an inspirational deity, a muse as it's sometimes translated. The second word of the poem is our reminder that the Iliad comes from an oral tradition. There's a live human being, a rhapsode, a poet, standing in front of you who's about to recite 16,000 lines of poetry from memory over multiple nights. It's the greatest one-man show to ever take place. And the poet here is calling up to the muses, these inspirational deities, to sing through him, to allow him to do justice to this epic story, and to assist him with the feat of memory. And the poet, we're going to see, calls up to the muses at a few different times in the poem, when there's a particularly important story, or when he needs to recite a long list from memory. It's a normal convention of these poems to begin with an invocation to the muse. We see it in the first line of the Odyssey, "Sing in me, muse." And this word sing is intentional. The poetry was recited, sometimes with a musical accompaniment, but the dactylic hexameter meter of the original Greek gave a rhythm and a musicality to the spoken word of the poem. Rage goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. Okay, who is Achilles and who are his parents? Achilles' father is Peleus, and his mother is the goddess Thetis. And it's this parentage that makes Achilles a Greek hero. A Greek hero in mythology is any mortal with one godly parent and one mortal parent. Heracles is probably the most famous of these heroes. And it's important, Achilles is not a hero because of the things he did, but because he is a mortal with a godly parent. In English today, we define a hero as someone who does heroic things, but it's actually the opposite. Our sense of what a heroic thing is comes from the things that Greek heroes did. Thetis, the goddess mother of Achilles, is going to play a critical role in this poem. She's an essential character for the first 23 books, and we'll introduce her in a bit. But we shouldn't overlook Peleus, because the last book, book 24, completely hinges on Achilles' love for his father Peleus. So I'm going to take you on a fun detour here and tell you the story of Peleus, which I'm adapting from this amazing book called the Bibliotheca by Apollodorus. It's a handbook of Greek mythology that was published in the 1st century AD. Peleus' story begins with Zeus, the king of Olympus and father of the Olympian gods. Zeus is a serial philanderer. He sets his eyes on a mortal woman, Aegina, whisks her away to a deserted island, beds her, and produces a son, Achilles. Achilles is alone on this island, so Zeus turns the ants of the island into people. Achilles takes one of these people as his wife, and she gives birth to 2 sons, Telamon and Peleus. So Peleus is the grandson of Zeus. So Achilles is the great-grandson of Zeus. And we'll see in the Iliad that Achilles draws his godly powers from his mother's side because she is a god and he carries half her blood. But when Achilles shines on the battlefield like a god, the characters of the Iliad will remember that on his father's side, he is descended from all-powerful Zeus. Okay, back to Peleus. He and his brother Telamon have a half-brother who's a star athlete. As the 3 of them train for the games, Peleus and Telamon grow jealous of their brother's prowess, and they begin to plot against him. They draw lots to see who will strike him. Telamon is selected, and when he's training, he hurls a heavy discus and hits his half-brother in the head and kills him. Peleus and Telamon hide the body, but they're discovered, and their father, Achilles, exiles them off the island. This idea of exile was a real and very specific ritual in ancient Greece. A killing created miasma, which was a spiritual contagion that threatened the city. The killer had to leave the city and seek purification from another king, and this is what Peleus does. Peleus is taken in by Eurytion, king of Achaea, who purifies Peleus. The Greek word for this purification rite is catharsis, and understanding the Greek ritual here gives so much weight to that word in English. We use catharsis to indicate agreement or resolution, but this catharsis in Greek was so much more powerful. It was an elimination of this miasma, this spiritual pollution that came when one person perpetrates a wrong on another. If you don't properly eradicate this miasma, it could start a blood feud and take down an entire city in civil strife. And this rite of catharsis cleansed that evil. So Eurytion washes away this evil from Peleus with water. He sacrifices an animal in his honor, and he lays hands on him to indicate that he's cleansed. Eurytion goes a step further and welcomes Peleus to his kingdom. He gives him his own daughter as a wife, and a third of the country of Achaea for Peleus to lord over. When a neighboring king calls for help to all the kings of Greece, Eurytion and Peleus answer the call together. They join this hunt for the massive Caledonian boar that's been set loose by the goddess Artemis to ruin crops and kill cattle. And as Peleus and Eurytion hunt the beast, Peleus throws his spear at it and he misses, and he accidentally hits Eurytion and kills him. So Eurytion dies, and Peleus now has to go into exile again. Peleus finds a different king, Acastos, to purify him. The king's wife, Astidamia, falls in love with Peleus, and Peleus rebuffs her. He's a married man, and he's just been purified by the woman's husband. But Astidamia is incensed at this. She tells Peleus' wife that he intends to marry a different man, and his wife is so devastated that she hangs herself. And then Astidamia tells her husband, the king, that Peleus was trying to seduce her. So King Acastos is obviously disturbed by this. He won't kill a man that he's ritually purified, but when they go out hunting in the woods, the king Acastos strands Peleus in the middle of the night and hides his sword. Peleus wakes up in the forest, no sword, and he's surrounded by the centaurs, these vicious creatures in the myths, who are half man from the waist up and half horse from the waist down. And right as the centaurs are about to kill Peleus, he's saved by Chiron, who's the legendary trainer of Greek heroes like Theseus and Heracles. Now fast forward, and Peleus has Achilles with the sea goddess Thetis. But the gods and goddesses don't stick around to raise their mortal kids. They have god things to do. So Peleus is raising Achilles as a single father, and he needs to protect him as a young boy. So he turns to Chiron. Chiron, the legendary trainer of Greek heroes, raises Achilles. In the Iliad, we'll see Achilles has a totally different level of skill on the battlefield. Some of this comes from the blessings of the gods, but a lot of it comes from the training of Chiron. Peleus delivered the child to Chiron, who took him in and fed him on the entrails of lions and wild boars and the marrow of bears, and named him Achilles. So Peleus, we never meet him in the Iliad. We only know of him through Achilles' remembrance of him. When he conjures these memories of Peleus, he conjures up imagery of a frail old man. But our understanding of Peleus as a young man from Apollodorus helps us to understand a key decision that Peleus makes in Achilles' childhood that will have a big effect on the events of the Iliad. Achilles spends the first 16 books of the Iliad raging against his king Agamemnon. But the rage shifts to the Trojan prince Hector when Hector kills Achilles' best friend Patroclus. When Patroclus was a young boy, he killed another boy during an argument after a game of jacks. Patroclus and his father go into exile, and it's King Peleus who welcomes them in and offers them this absolution, this catharsis. Peleus himself sought absolution twice. Once for a foolish spat of jealousy as a child against his stepbrother. So he can see the good in Patroclus, and he takes him in and he raises him as his own son. And from that moment, Achilles and Patroclus are inseparable. This cycle of exile and absolution that Peleus goes through twice is what brings Chiron and Patroclus into Achilles' life. Rage goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles. Murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses. So Achilles is doomed, and this is my favorite theme in the Iliad. The fate of all these characters is written by Zeus, and they're fully aware of this. In the final book of the Iliad, Achilles and Priam come face to face, and they reflect on the tragedy that's befallen each of them in the poem. Achilles says, "So the immortals spun our lives, that we wretched men live on to bear such torments. The gods live free of sorrows. There are two great jars that stand on the floor of Zeus's halls and hold as gifts our miseries in one, the other blessings. When Zeus, who loves the lightning, mixes gifts for a man, now he meets with misfortune, now good times in turn." So Zeus determines the fate of all humans. And the messenger of fate in the Iliad is Achilles' mother, the goddess Thetis. And I'll now take a detour to tell her story. From the Iliad and from Apollodorus, we get this picture of Thetis as this stunning and powerful goddess. She's so desirable that Zeus, the chief god of the skies, and his brother Poseidon, the chief god of the seas, are both competing for her hand. They both withdraw, though, when they hear a prophecy that the son born to Thetis will be more powerful than his father. To ensure Thetis doesn't produce an all-powerful son, they marry her off to a mortal, and they choose Peleus. And they throw a star-studded wedding on Mount Pelion, which is the property of the centaur Chiron, who saved Peleus' life all those years ago. And the who's who of gods and mortals attend this wedding. Thetis isn't so keen to produce a child with Peleus. So when Peleus tries to take hold of her, she shapeshifts into fire and then water and then a beast. But eventually she relents and they have a child. Thetis wanted an immortal child, and prophecy, fate, stuck her with a mortal one. She does everything she can to try and turn Achilles immortal. She rubs him with ambrosia, the food of the gods. And in secret from Peleus, she puts baby Achilles into a fire to try and burn away the mortal part of his soul. Peleus sees this and he's mortified, and he rushes in to save Achilles from the fire. In a later retelling of these myths, the Roman poets say that Thetis took Achilles to the underworld, again to try and make him immortal. She dipped him in the river Styx to make his skin impermeable, and she holds him by his heel when she dunks him in the water. And that's why we say a spot of vulnerability is the Achilles heel, because it's the one part of Achilles that isn't submerged and isn't made invulnerable. We don't directly see this in the Iliad, but we know that Achilles is eventually killed from an arrow that's shot by Hector's brother, Paris, which strikes Achilles in his heel. Again, I think fate and what you do in the face of fate is the most interesting theme of the Iliad. And I see here Thetis, a woman who was denied her true love, Zeus, by fate, and was denied an immortal child by fate. You have to imagine being a deathless god and only having a son for a blip of time before he perishes, then having to continue living for eternity without that child. This is an unimaginable tragedy, and we see Thetis in the poem lament the doom of her son over and over again. And this is why poetically, literarily, it makes sense that she's the messenger of fate. Achilles is doomed. Murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses. Okay, who were the Achaeans? Ancient Greece was never a unified country with a single leader. In ancient times, it was a collection of city-states, and each city-state had its own leader, its own army, and its own form of government. So Athens, for example, was very famously the first democracy. But all these people from all these different city-states thought of themselves as Greek. They spoke a common Greek language, and they believed in the same Olympian gods, and honored the same sacred sites at Delphi and Olympia. Achaeans is one of the earliest names for Greek-speaking people. And we'll see Homer use these names, Achaeans, Argives, and Danaans, throughout the poem to refer to this same Greek fighting force that is trying to destroy Troy. The Achaeans are a coalition of Greek forces, pulled from different kingdoms and cities and islands across Greece. These kings and their fighting forces all respect Agamemnon as the leader of men, but they're genuine kings in their own right, and they're referred to as kings throughout the poem. The Achaeans are less of a singular fighting force than they are an alliance of many different forces, brought together for this specific expedition to sack Troy and retrieve Helen. Each of these kings will have at least one shining moment in the poem. And I'll just list these kings on the screen here, and I'll point out that Achilles is the only one of these chieftains who is not a king. His father, Peleus, is still alive and the king of Theia. Achilles is a prince, and we'll see some of the other characters try to play this card in the poem, telling him that he must honor his father, the king, and fight. And as we'll see, Achilles is his own man. When Agamemnon takes Achilles' girl Briseis, Achilles abstains from the fight and encourages Zeus to rain hell on the Achaeans. His rage costs his own people, the Achaeans, countless losses. Murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses. The next line of the poem, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls. If you're new to Greek mythology, there's a whole world here, the House of Death, or Hades as it's sometimes called, after the god Hades who lords over it. The Greeks have an incredibly detailed conception of the underworld. They've thought of it like a real place with multiple locations, and they're not all bad. It's not like the conception of hell that the Abrahamic religions believe in. There's the meadows of Asphodel, which is where most souls go. All mortals who are not especially bad or good wander around in the fields of Asphodel for eternity. There's Tartarus, which is an abyss, as far below Hades as earth is from heaven. It's the closest thing to hell in the Greek myths. The poet Hesiod says the pit is so low, you'd fall 9 days and 9 nights from earth before reaching it on the 10th. The pit of Tartarus is where Zeus sends his father Kronos and the Titans when he defeats them. And it's not considered by Homer to be a resting place for mortals. There's the fields of punishment, where Zeus sends specific men convicted of specific evils to do punishing tasks, like Sisyphus, who Zeus condemns to roll a boulder uphill for eternity. And then there's the Elysian Plain, or Elysium, as it's later known, for the most heroic mortals. There's one more location worth mentioning, the river Styx. In the Greek world, the ocean, Oceanus, is really a river which encircles the world, and 9 parts of that river encircle the world, and the 10th part extends down into Hades, flowing with sacred water. When gods swear oaths, they swear them on the river Styx. The penalty of breaking one of these oaths is 1 year placed in a coma, deprived of ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods, and then 9 years banished from the other gods. This is why we hear the gods in the Iliad make oaths on the river Styx. When they swear something on Styx, they really mean it. The domain of the underworld, the House of Death, is lorded over by Hades. The Titan Rhea gave birth to 3 sons, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And they drew lots to divide the universe into 3 planes to lord over. Zeus drew the skies, Poseidon drew the seas, and Hades drew the underworld. Olympus and Earth are meant to be neutral ground, but as we'll see in the poem, Zeus is so much more powerful than his brothers that he rules in these 2 places too. hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, and made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds. That word carrion means decaying flesh. There's the basic reading of these lines that Achilles' refusal to fight alongside the Achaeans costs his own men to lose countless lives, and the souls of these men go down to the house of death, and their bodies remain on earth, decomposing, feasts for the dogs and birds. But the presence of these lines so early in the poem shows us just how important deceased bodies are to the Iliad, because there's a whole system of beliefs about the glory of a man's armor and the burial right for a man's body. If you're a fighter and you defeat a man in battle, you want to strip his armor. If the deceased man is of any status, the armor is made of bronze, which is a valuable metal. But more than the value of the metal, this is one of the ways that you can win glory for yourself. Like a trophy hunter of men, that armor is your trophy. When these great fighters go into battle, there's a whole team that go with them. Achilles, for example, goes into battle in a chariot. His own personal horses pull that chariot, and he has a professional charioteer that drives it. And this charioteer gets Achilles into position, then gets him out. So when Achilles, or any of these other warlords, defeats a man in battle, it sets off this chain reaction. Achilles runs to the dead body and immediately begins stripping its armor. The armor consists of a helmet, a chest plate, and greaves for the legs. And as he gets loose each piece of armor, he throws it to his team, or whatever junior soldiers are close by. And they know to get that piece of armor into the chariot. Once it's all in the chariot, his charioteer rushes it back to the lodge where it's cleaned and mounted. But when Achilles is stripping the armor, he's completely vulnerable. You can imagine it's not easy to fiddle with the straps and to push the body's limbs through the armor to take it off. So as soon as Achilles or any of the other warlords defeat someone in battle, his soldiers watch him carefully to see if he's going to go strip the armor. And if they see him go for the armor, they drop what they're doing and they try and encircle him to defend him while he does this. But the other side isn't going to just let this happen. They know Achilles is vulnerable while he's stripping the armor, so they rush to attack him. They want to keep the armor of their fallen comrade to return it to his family. And most importantly, they don't want the fallen soldier's body to be defiled. And we see these massive battles over and over again over deceased bodies of heroes in the Iliad. And there's a pattern. The winners strip the armor, but the losers get to return the body to the family. And I think Homer sets up this pattern over and over again in the Iliad so that he can break it in Book 22 when Achilles kills Hector. When Achilles defeats Hector, he's in full rage after the death of his friend Patroclus. The Trojans are so terrified of Achilles, they don't rush in to defend Hector's body. So Achilles strips the armor from Hector and brutally disrespects Hector's body. And this is shocking to us when we read it, and it's shocking to the characters in the poem. Achilles ropes up Hector's body and drags it around the walls of Troy, then drags it back to his camp. And this is the ultimate desecration for King Priam of Troy, to see his son's body tossing around in the dirt. And we get a description of King Priam, that he's in such despair at the death of his son and the desecration of Hector's body, that Priam refuses to eat. He sinks down to the floor and covers himself in animal dung, and he cries for 12 days. The desecration of Hector's body is so severe that the gods directly intervene. They prevent Hector's body from decaying, and they ward off the dogs and the birds, and they devise a plan to return the corpse to Priam. In the last book of the Iliad, Priam himself comes to Achilles' lodge to ransom his son's body. And we get something of a resolution between these two men in this scene. At times, the Iliad is about a thing, and there's nothing more consequential to the story than the bodies and armor of fallen heroes. And the Will of Zeus was moving toward its end. The Iliad gives us 16,000 lines of Greek heroes slaughtering each other. And this is all happening to produce outcomes that are fated by Zeus, willed by Zeus. So who is Zeus? And what is his will? What is the purpose of this Trojan War? Homer doesn't actually give us the answer to that question in the Iliad. He just assumes that you know it. So I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to introduce Zeus and who he is. And I'm going to take you through what the purpose is of this Trojan War, why he sets it into motion. Everybody knows of Zeus from the stories they read as a child. He's the father of the skies. But the story from the Greek myths is actually so much stranger. And Zeus is a fully developed character in these myths. He has his own desires and his own fears, and we'll see him suffer his own tragic losses when his role as a king comes into conflict with his role as a father. To appreciate him as a character in the Iliad, and to know why he lets all hell break loose in Troy, we need to know Zeus as the Greeks did. So remember, there are two original Greek poets whose work survives. There's Homer and Hesiod, both of them writing around 700 BC. Homer will give us allusions to the Greek myths in the Iliad and in the Odyssey, but he's most interested in telling a great story. He assumes that you already know the myths. Thankfully, Hesiod teaches us the myths. He writes didactic poems, teaching poems, called the Theogony and Works and Days. And they're short. Together, they're about 60 pages long. But they give us the Greek myths from the time of Homer in a compact form. I've made a previous video about these poems where I go into every strange detail about Zeus and his demented family, but I'll hit the most essential and bizarre details here. In the beginning, there was nothing, chasm as it's translated. Then the primordial beings formed, Gaia, the earth, and then Eros, the primordial force of desire, who makes all future reproduction possible for gods and mortals. Gaia's first child is Uranos, heaven, whom she reproduces with, the first of many incestuous relationships among the Greek gods. The children that Gaia and Uranos produce are a different tier of being. Gaia and Uranos are primordial beings. Their children are called the Titans. The youngest of their children is Kronos. After the Titans, Uranos and Gaia produce 6 monsters, the 3 Cyclopses and the 300-armed monsters, and they'll be important later. Uranos loathed his children, the Titans and the monsters, and he shoves them in a cavern in Gaia, Mother Earth. And you can imagine this is painful to Gaia and terrifying for the children to be shoved inside their mother. Gaia fashions a scythe from a stone, and she offers it to their children and asks them who would use it against their father Uranos. The Titans all fear their father, except Kronos. Kronos slices off Uranos' genitals and flings them across the earth, and the blood gives birth to the giants and the Furies, and the semen churns to white foam in the sea and gives birth to Aphrodite. Aphros is foam in Greek. And remember, I told you this story was crazy. So Kronos reigns over the heavens and the earth after defeating his father. He reproduces with his sister, Rhea. There's a very unfortunate theme here, if you haven't caught on yet. And they have 3 daughters, Hera, Hestia, and Demeter, and 3 sons, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. This is the third and final race of gods. First, there were the primordial beings, next the Titans, and this next generation, Zeus's generation, is who we think of when we say the Olympian gods, because they'll rule from Mount Olympus. So Gaia and Uranos tell Kronos that he's fated to be overthrown by his son. So Kronos begins swallowing his children as they're born. And this bit is how we know that fate predates Zeus. Zeus may influence fate. Sometimes he writes fate when he ascends the throne at Olympus. But fate and prophecy as entities exist separately from him. Kronos is eating his children, and Rhea wants to defend them. So she feeds Kronos a stone, wrapped as a baby cloth instead of Zeus, and she hides Zeus in a cave in Crete. Zeus grows strong. He makes alliances with some of the Titans. He frees the 100-armed monsters and the Cyclopses, who forge his famous thunderbolt. And with this thunderbolt, Zeus is unstoppable. And it's shocking to me how much the description in Hesiod of the destruction wrought by the thunderbolt reads like a description of a modern-day nuclear explosion. The hot blast enveloped the chthonic Titans. The indescribable flames reached the divine sky, and the sparkling fire of the thunderbolt and the lightning dazzled the strongest eyes. In the Iliad, we'll see many of the Olympian gods fight alongside the heroes of Achaea and Troy, but Zeus himself never directly fights. In the Theogony, we see the absolute devastation that comes when Zeus himself marches to battle. His power with his thunderbolt shakes the heavens and the earth and even the misty depths of Tartarus. Zeus wages a 10-year war against his father Kronos and the other Titans, and this war is called the Titanomachy. Zeus wins it decisively, and he throws the Titans into Tartarus, and this begins Zeus's reign over the cosmos. This myth is called the succession myth because it's each generation of gods overthrowing the prior generation. So Kronos overthrows his father Uranos, and Zeus overthrows his father Kronos. So naturally, Zeus fears that he too will be overthrown by his son. And his grandparents, Gaia and Uranos, confirm this after Zeus's marriage to Metis, the goddess of wisdom. They warn that Metis is prophesied to have 2 children, a daughter with wisdom and courage to rival her father, and a son who will rule gods and men, and in doing so overthrow Zeus. As Metis is about to give birth, Zeus swallows his wife. No wife, no son. Problem solved. So Metis lives inside of him, and from this moment on, Zeus has her infinite wisdom. But one day, Zeus suffers a headache, and he begs one of the other gods to split his head open with an axe. And Athena, the goddess of wisdom, leaps from his forehead. No son is born, just the daughter Athena, and Zeus is not overthrown. This episode haunts Zeus, and this is why he doesn't engage Achilles' mother Thetis after she's prophesied to give birth to a son more powerful than the father. So Zeus wins the Titanomachy with absolute power, but he institutes law and order, and this is an important departure from the rule of his grandfather Uranos and his father Kronos. The Olympian gods couldn't get rid of Zeus even if they wanted to. He's too powerful with his thunderbolt. But they don't want to get rid of him because he's so just. The Theogony tells us that when Zeus gains power, he apportions the cosmic domains to the gods to give each of them their discipline to rule over. And he apportions honor to mortal men. And he values truth. Lying had long plagued the gods, so Zeus institutes the oath on the river Styx. Zeus brings this civility to the gods. He brings order to the chaos. And God and man alike recognize that this order is a good thing. So the gods and the mortal heroes of the Iliad accept the fate that's decreed by Zeus, because they're powerless to change it, and because they genuinely believe in him as a just king. But still, what is the will of Zeus? Why does he set the Trojan War in motion? Again, Homer doesn't tell us in the Iliad. He assumes that we know this. We have to get the answer from Hesiod's other poem, Works and Days. The will of Zeus is the absolute destruction of the demigod heroes at Troy. This is revealed in the famous myth of the ages of man, which on the surface level tells us the story of the creation of mankind. It speaks of the first men created by the gods of gold. And these golden age men were very close to being gods themselves. And with each successive age of man, there are 5 ages, men became less like gods and more like the men who walk the earth today. This is an allegory, a story that means something on the surface level, but tells a deeper story too. And that deeper story is of civilizational decline. It's Hesiod, the author, it's his observation around the year 700 that the society he lived in was worse than the society of his ancestors. So the gist of this story is that Kronos and the Titans first make men from gold, and these men are glorious. Zeus and his brothers and sisters make the next generation of men from silver, and these men are terrible. They live the first 100 years of their lives as babies, swaddled by their mothers, and they come into adulthood and cannot help but commit crimes against each other. So Zeus covers this silver age of man and tries again with bronze. And this age of men are vicious fighters, consumed by war. Hesiod tells us they were laid low by their own hands. He's telling us that Zeus didn't cover this age of man and earth. They did it to themselves with their own hands. They destroyed each other with unrelenting war. And finally, this fourth time, Zeus gets it right. The next age is the age of heroes. After trying and failing to fashion men out of silver, and trying and failing to fashion men out of bronze, Zeus and the gods of Olympus create the age of heroes by directly mating with mortals. This, as we've said, is the definition of a Greek hero. They're half-gods, demigods, born of one mortal parent and one godly parent. Achilles and Heracles are both heroes, one god parent, one mortal parent. Hesiod tells us that these heroes are our predecessors on the boundless earth. This is what the ancient Greeks believe, that we are descended from the demigods and from their parents. So we are descended from the gods. And this is something we see used to great political effect in the Iliad. These great leaders like King Priam of Troy, who isn't a demigod himself, he's just a regular man, but he claims his family lineage 6 generations ago is descended from Zeus. There's a divine right of authority that some of these men claim from their lineage. And what do these demigods do in this glorious heroic age? They go to war with each other. Hesiod tells us that ugly war and fearful fighting destroyed them, some below 7-gated Thebes as they battled for Oedipus's flocks, and others it led in ships over the great abyss of the sea to Troy, on account of lovely-haired Helen. So there were 2 battles that wipe out these heroes. The first is the battle at Thebes, which we'll get to later this year with the famous story of Oedipus Rex. Oedipus is the king of Thebes. And the second is the Trojan War. This is the purpose of the Trojan War, to wipe out these heroes. Before the age of heroes, mortal men live in fear of these remnants of a chaotic past. We remember this is the same earth that was walked by the 3 Cyclopses and the 300-armed monsters. There are mutated, extremely powerful evils on earth, and man cannot live in fear of them forever. The demigod Theseus had to slay the Minotaur. The demigod Perseus had to slay Medusa. Heracles alone was strong enough to slay the Nemean lion. Zeus needed these demigods to bring balance to man and monster, to slay these vestiges of an unruly past. But what does a demigod as strong as Achilles do when there are no more monsters to slay? He slays man. In Book 18 of the Iliad, after his friend Patroclus has been slain, Achilles emerges from his tent in emotional ruin. He climbs atop an embankment and he looks across the battlefield and he lets out an emotional, rageful scream. And this scream alone kills 12 Trojan men. This is an unbalanced power. This is Zeus's will. Hesiod names Thebes and Troy as the wars that eliminate the heroes, that balance this unbalanced power. With no more worthy adversaries for these heroes, Zeus turns them on each other. He architects the Trojan War, the most epic war in all of history, to give these heroes their moment of honor. And the whole time we read the poem, we know that we're headed towards this end, the demise of the Age of Heroes and the total destruction of Troy. Okay, let's get on with the rest of Book 1. And we're going to continue as Homer calls up to the Muses. Began Muse when the 2 first broke and clashed. Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant, Achilles. And this is the rest of book one. It's the split between the warrior Achilles and his king Agamemnon. And we come to the Achaeans at the start of book one after they've been fighting for 9 years. And you can imagine how demoralizing this is, because they're not trying to take an entire continent. This is a small area that they're fighting in. There's a beach where they've landed with their ships and they've made camp. There's a field with some grass and some stones. And then there's the walled city of Troy. And for 9 years, the Achaeans have been trying to get from the beach through the grass and to do anything they can to get through that wall at Troy. But each time they get close to scaling the wall or breaking down the gates, they're beat back by the Trojans. And there are no tours of duty like we would think of in modern times, where you can send home troops who are tired and bring in a fresh batch. It's these same guys, Achilles, Menelaus, Agamemnon, Odysseus, who have been fighting there for 9 years, desperately trying to get from the beach through the wall. And as if that's not demoralizing enough, we come to the Achaeans at the start of book one after they've suffered 9 days of plague. Plague in ancient Greece is the domain of the god Apollo, who has a special connection with the Trojans. They sacrifice to him, and there are temples to Apollo in Troy. And by the way, we see this number 9 everywhere in the poems. There's 9 years of war. There's 9 days of plague. The poets Hesiod and Homer use this number 9 because it gave the audiences satisfaction. 9 units of conflict and then resolution on the 10th. So 9 years of war and then it was won in the 10th. Or 9 days of plague and then it stopped on the 10th. It gives this pattern to the audience that's hearing the poem aloud, and it foreshadows where the poem's going. You can imagine this also made it so much easier for the rhapsode who's reciting this poetry, because they don't have to remember unique numbers. If there's a number in the story, it's probably 9. The Greek for 9 was also easier for them to fit into the dactylic hexameter meter of the poem. So Enea is the Greek word. It's pronounced as short, long, short, and it fits the first part of a dactyl, which is one of the units of the dactylic hexameter. And that unit is long, short, short. So Achilles goes to the seer in the camp and asks him to explain Apollo's anger. Why is there this huge plague that's hit them? And in a recent battle, the Achaean king, Agamemnon, had taken a girl as his war prize. And that girl was the daughter of the Trojan priest of Apollo. So when the Trojan priest of Apollo came to Agamemnon to ask for his daughter back, Agamemnon refused. So the priest called up to Apollo, who rained the silent arrows, is the term that Homer uses, the silent arrows of plague on the Achaeans for 9 days. Agamemnon is furious. He knows he needs to give the girl back to end the plague, but he won't go without. He wants someone else's girl. And Achilles speaks up and says that this is unjust. The king can't take from one of the men and leave him without. Agamemnon would have to wait until the next battle when they can take additional war prizes. And Agamemnon explodes in anger. He is the king, so he should have whatever he wants. And how dare Achilles not respect the supremacy of the king? Agamemnon says he will have a girl from one of his own men, and he commands the men to bring him Achilles' girl, the beautiful Briseis, whom Achilles had grown to love. And there's an immediate hypocrisy in this moment, because Achilles and all of these men have followed Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus to Troy to fight for 9 years, because the Trojan prince Paris took Menelaus' wife Helen. And now Agamemnon, the great hypocrite, will take Achilles' girl. The reaction from Achilles shows us so much about his character. So first, he wins the hearts and minds of the men around him. He says to Agamemnon, "My honors never equal yours. Whenever we sack some wealthy Trojan stronghold, my arms bear the brunt of the raw, savage fighting, true. But when it comes to dividing up the plunder, the lion's share is yours. And back I go to my ships, clutching some scrap, some pittance that I love, when I have fought to exhaustion." He's saying what all the men are feeling. that they're fighting their hearts out. They answered the call from Agamemnon to defend his brother's honor. Yet when they have small victories, the prize goes first to Agamemnon. This is Achilles the politician. He's saying what everyone in the room is thinking, but nobody has the courage to say themselves. Then he shows that he's untouchable, and this enrages Agamemnon. Achilles says, okay, this is pointless. I'll just leave. No more now. Back I go to Phthia. Better that way by far, to journey home in the beaked ships of war. I have no mind to linger here disgraced, brimming your cup and piling up your plunder. Again, the courage. He's telling the king to his face that he's going to desert. And this shows the real power of Achilles. He's in control. You can insult him. You can take his war prize, but you cannot compel him to do what he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to be there anymore, so he'll just leave. He has freedom. Agamemnon explodes at this and goes off on this tirade insulting Achilles. At one point he says, "You're nothing to me." And this is the best part, because we saw Achilles appeal to reason, we saw him quit, and now we'll see him rage. He draws his blade from his sheath, fully prepared to cut down Agamemnon, when the goddess Athena rushes down to stop him. And time freezes here. Achilles and the goddess Athena have a conversation in this frozen moment. She tells him that Athena and Zeus's wife Hera love both Agamemnon and Achilles dearly, and she begs him not to harm Agamemnon. And now we see the wisdom of Achilles, because he instantly checks his anger and he obeys the goddess Athena. So she urged, and the swift runner complied at once. "I must, when the two of you hand down commands, goddess. A man submits, though his heart breaks with fury. Better for him by far. If a man obeys the gods, they're quick to hear his prayers." More than any other man in this poem, Achilles is in tune with fate. He understands when he can push the bounds of fate and when he must yield. And he finds shrewd ways to advance his aims within those bounds of fate. And that's exactly what he's doing here. Athena comes to him so dramatically to pause time and beg for Agamemnon's life. And he wouldn't dare defy her. He'll obey her, then he'll use that favor to exact punishment on Agamemnon. If a man obeys the gods, they're quick to hear his prayers. Back at his camp that night, Achilles sees these two couriers approaching the tent, and they're terrified. They've been sent by Agamemnon to take Briseis, and they fear Achilles. But Achilles charms them. "Welcome, couriers, good heralds of Zeus and men. Here, come closer. You have done nothing to me. You are not to blame. No one but Agamemnon. But let them both bear witness to my loss, if the day should come when the armies need me to save their ranks from ignominious stark defeat." This is the magnanimity of Achilles. It's the virtue of megapsyche in the Greek, which literally translates to great-souled. This is one of the Aristotelian virtues in his work, the Nicomachean Ethics, that he writes about 300 years after Homer. Achilles is a great-souled man. It's the essence of who he is as a character in this story. He's a great man, and he knows it. This is an essential part of magnanimity. He charms these couriers because he knows they're lower than him, and there's no sense in punishing or feuding with men lower than him. His issue is with Agamemnon, who is also a great man, Achilles' equal. And to inflict pain on his equal, Achilles will appeal to the only beings greater than kings, the gods. That evening he calls up to his mother, Thetis, the powerful sea goddess, and explains this injustice. He implores her to use a relationship with Zeus to inflict pain on Agamemnon and the Achaeans. And remember, Thetis and Zeus were once lovers, but because of the prophecy that she would give birth to a child greater than the father, they couldn't be together. But there's a history here. So Thetis feels for her son, and here is where we get this feeling from Thetis that she's so sympathetic to the doom of Achilles. "Oh, my son, my sorrow, why did I ever bear you? All I bore was doom." So Thetis appeals to Zeus. She wraps her arms around his knees, which is a gesture of supplication. It's a way to beg of someone more powerful than you. Zeus, Father Zeus, if ever I served you well, bring this prayer to pass. Honor my son Achilles, doomed to the shortest life of any man on earth. And now the Lord of men, Agamemnon, has disgraced him, seizes and keeps his prize, tears her away himself. But you exalt him, Olympian Zeus. Your urgings rule the world. Come, grant the Trojans victory after victory, till the Achaean armies pay my dear son back, building higher the honor he deserves. And this puts Zeus in a terrible position. He must disperse honor to the gods and men. And in Thetis, gripping his knees, he has a great goddess. And in Achilles, her son, he has the greatest of men, and they must have their honor. He won't change Achilles' fate. He's still doomed. But he must give Achilles honor within this fate. But giving Achilles this honor will put Zeus in direct conflict with his wife Hera, the queen of Olympus, who despises the Trojans, and she too must have her honor. Filled with anger, Zeus, who marshals the storm clouds, answered her at last. Disaster! You will drive me into war with Hera. She will provoke me, she with her shrill abuse. Even now, in the face of all the immortal gods, she harries me perpetually. Hera charges me that I always go to battle for the Trojans. Away with you now. Hera might catch us here. I will see to this. I will bring it all to pass. Look, I will bow my head if that will satisfy you. That, I remind you, that among the immortal gods is the strongest, truest sign that I can give. No work of mine, nothing can be revoked. There is no treachery, nothing left unfinished, once I bow my head to say it shall be done. We're getting so much of Zeus's character here. He's a man in an impossible position. He must preserve fairness and cosmic balance, because this is what defines his rule. This is what makes him the just ruler of gods and men. But this will put him in direct, personal conflict with his wife. The obvious question here is, why does Hera hate the Trojans so much? Homer doesn't actually tell us until book 24 of the Iliad, because this is one of those things that he just assumes the audience knows. It's the story of the judgment of Paris. Now remember, Thetis can't marry a god because she's prophesied to give birth to a son greater than the father. So the gods marry her to mortal Peleus, and this wedding is a star-studded event on the great centaur Chiron's property. All the gods are there, except Strife. Strife, the goddess of conflict, was not invited. So she crashes the wedding, and she tosses out a golden apple, which is inscribed to the most beautiful. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite all claim it. They go to Zeus to judge, and he basically says, nice try. He's not going to judge who the most beautiful is, especially with his own wife Hera and his daughter Athena in the competition. So he orders Hermes, the messenger god, to take the three goddesses to Paris, the prince of Troy, who's working as a shepherd on Mount Ida. Paris is perceived as a fair man, and he's actually supposed to be dead. There was a prophecy when he was a boy that he would destroy Troy. So the Trojans exposed him, this barbaric thing they would do in ancient Greece, where they would abandon a baby on a mountaintop. But Paris survived and was raised by shepherds. As we know by now, men can't escape their fates. And this episode will fulfill this prophecy that Paris will destroy Troy. These three goddesses present themselves to Paris and ask him to judge their beauty. And they bribe him with gifts. Hera offers Paris rule of all of Asia. Athena offers Paris victory in war and wisdom. But Aphrodite offers Paris the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chooses Aphrodite, and this sets him in motion to Sparta, where he will meet the most beautiful Helen and take her to Troy and begin the Trojan War. And this makes vicious enemies out of Hera and Athena because he didn't pick them. And so we'll see Hera and Athena whip up support of some of the gods against the Trojans. We'll see other gods who will meet who have their own grudges against King Priam and his sons and his ancestors. And we'll meet other gods who have been honored with sacrifice by the Trojans, and whose demigod sons fight with Troy. And this sets up the Great Trojan War. There's this layer which is a schism among the gods, immortals fighting alongside common men in this huge battle for honor and glory. And through almost all of it, Achilles is nowhere to be seen. He's sulking in silence at his camp, stewing on the insults of Agamemnon, and relishing in this idea of retribution with each Trojan victory. But he raged on, grimly encamped by his fast fleet, the royal son of Peleus, the swift runner, Achilles. Now he no longer haunted the meeting grounds where men win glory. Now he no longer went to war. But day after day he ground his heart out, waiting there, yearning, always yearning for battle cries and combat. This is our Achilles for the next 16 books, brooding, raging, and doing nothing. He's just exulting in the slaughter of his fellow Achaeans. In Book 2, Zeus sends a dream to Agamemnon, showing him that he will be victorious if he mounts a full attack on Troy. But this is a trick, because Zeus has made his promise to Achilles' mother Thetis. This first deception of Agamemnon through the dream is the start of Zeus's fulfillment of this promise. He will inflict pain on the Achaeans for the next 16 books of the Iliad. And as the great Achaean armies assemble, this is the test of the rhapsode, who has to give an accounting of all the great Greeks who have formed this coalition. This is the first time that we're seeing them suit up for battle. This is a moment early on in the poem for the rhapsode to show off to his live audience. Because if he can pull off this feat of memory, he's going to win the audience's trust for all the details that will follow in the poem. So the rhapsode makes this epic call up to the Muses for help in this recitation. Sing to me now, you Muses who hold the halls of Olympus. You are goddesses, you are everywhere. You know all things. All we hear is the distant ring of glory. We know nothing. Who were the captains of Achaea? Who were the kings? The mass of troops I could never tally, never name. Not even if I had 10 tongues and 10 mouths, a tireless voice, and a heart inside me, bronze. Never, unless you Muses of Olympus, daughters of Zeus, whose shield is rolling thunder, sing, sing in memory all who gathered under Troy. Now I can only tell the lords of the ships in all their numbers. And after this epic call up to the Muses, the rhapsode goes on a tear for 300 lines, reciting 29 Greek armies and tallying their 1,200 ships. And this is a test too for us as readers, because we have to resist the urge to notate and memorize it all for ourselves. Yes, we do want to read the poem closely, and we want to soak every bit of meaning out of it, but we don't need this level of detail. I'd recommend that you read through it, but don't let it bog you down. There's a great bit of wisdom here from my favorite philosopher, the Roman statesman Seneca. It used to be a Greek failing to want to know how many oarsmen Odysseus had, whether the Iliad or the Odyssey was written first, and whether too they were by the same author, and other questions of this kind, which if you keep them to yourself in no way enhance your private knowledge, and if you publish them, make you appear more of a bore than a scholar. But now the Romans too have been afflicted by the pointless enthusiasm for useless knowledge. This is Seneca's appeal to read the classics for practical wisdom, the Greek phronesis, which brings us into communion with thousands of years of humans before us. And of course, we're reading for enjoyment, but we're not reading to learn useless details. So again, I think that you should read Book 2 and the list in Book 2, but don't get bogged down by it. So this Achaean army assembles, and so do the Trojans. And we begin Book 3 set for battle. Now, there's no doubt that the Trojans are an inferior fighting force to the Achaeans. And in Book 3, we meet the Trojan army. And similarly to the Achaeans, the Trojans are also a coalition of allied forces. But whereas the Achaeans speak a common tongue and have a camaraderie that makes them fight as a singular force. We sense that the Trojan allies are less organized. There's the main Trojan army, this well-trained fighting force, led by King Priam's favorite son, Hector. But the other fighting forces that make up the bulk of the coalition are different forces from all over Anatolia. They don't all speak the same language, and we sense that they have different amounts of training for battle. The Trojans have held on for 9 years in this war, not because of the strength of their coalition, but because of the strength of their walls. The fortifications of Troy are enormous, and this advantage, being able to fight atop the walls and retreat into the walls, it's what has sustained the Trojans all these years. And when the Achaeans approach for this first battle, it's not the mighty Hector who steps forth. It's Paris, Hector's younger brother, who's slim and athletic and extremely handsome, and he bravely steps forward. And Menelaus steps forward to meet him. Menelaus is Helen's husband, whom Paris stole her from after Menelaus welcomed Paris and Hector into his home. And now Helen's two husbands are staring down each other in this battlefield. And the description of Menelaus from Fagles shows us the power of this man. Soon as the warrior Menelaus marked him, Paris, parading there with his big loping strides, flaunting before the troops. Atrides thrilled like a lion, lighting on some handsome carcass. So Menelaus thrilled at his heart, princely Paris there, right before his eyes. The outlaw, the adulterer. Now for revenge, he thought, and down he leapt from his chariot, fully armed, and hit the ground. We imagine this slim, agile Paris striding about at the front lines. And we're told earlier that Paris wears a leopard skin, and this description of him as this lithe and agile, it reinforces that comparison with the leopard. We imagine him stalking back and forth on the front lines. But Menelaus is a different type of man. Homer tells us Atrides thrilled like a lion. Atrides is the patronymic, the fatherly name of Menelaus and Agamemnon. We see these patronymics used throughout the poem to connect these men to the heroic lineage that preceded them. Menelaus and Agamemnon are brothers, and their father's name is Atreus. So Atrides is used for Agamemnon and Menelaus, meaning son of Atreus. And Atrides thrilled like a lion. This is one of the many similes that mark the writing style of Homer. It's a comparison using like or as, and it transports us to the visual world so quickly. You have to remember it's 2,700 years ago. There are obviously no photos of Menelaus to show what the man looked like. And of course, there's no video of how he moved. But when we hear of a man thrilling like a lion, we can imagine the power of that man and the way in which he might move. The intimidation of such a large and powerful being, moving with so much enthusiasm, thrilling. And we can visualize so clearly how differently that man feels to the agile leopard man of Paris. And this lion of Menelaus thrilled like he was seeing a handsome carcass. Handsome because Menelaus is seeing the handsome Paris. But he sees Paris not even as prey. The word is carcass, already dead. It's evoking the confidence of Menelaus. The choice of this word carcass is telling us that the outcome of any fight between them is already predetermined, and Paris is as good as dead. Menelaus looks at Paris with hatred in his eyes. He sees him as the outlaw, the adulterer, the man who stole his wife. Menelaus jumps down from his chariot, fully armed, and hit the ground. And we imagine this like a superhero landing of a very powerful man. He hit the ground. And when Paris sees Menelaus, this lion of a man, Paris is overcome with fear. And Homer tells us he dissolves back into the Trojan lines. His great brother, Hector, sees this. And here we get the first lines from Hector in this poem. He eviscerates his brother Paris, who has lured Helen away from Sparta and invited this war. There's this distinction between the selfishness of Paris and the duty of Hector. They're brothers, sure, but there's no love lost from Hector. And Paris, he sees a young fool whose lust has depleted Troy's treasures, laid low some of its best men, and one day will cost Hector his own life. Paris, appalling Paris, our prince of beauty, mad for women, you lure them all to ruin. Would to God you'd never been born, died unwed. That's all I'd ask. Better that way by far than to have you strutting here, an outrage, a mockery in the eyes of all our enemies. Why, the long-haired Achaeans must be roaring with laughter. Paris is hurt by these words from his brother Hector, who he looks up to, and Paris essentially says, okay, you want me to fight? I'll fight. And Hector doesn't need to hear that twice. He rides out into the no man's land between the two armies and offers to Agamemnon a one-on-one duel between Paris and Menelaus. Helen's two husbands can fight to the death, and the winner will claim Helen and the war will be over. So the men square off, and King Priam of Troy sits atop the ramparts, and Helen sits at his side. And this is a dramatic moment for Helen, for her to see her husband, Menelaus, for the first time in 9 years, and for the Achaean armies and many of the Trojan warlords to finally see the woman they've been fighting for. And these Trojan warlords feel their hearts melting for Helen. This is the pull of this woman. And catching sight of Helen moving along the ramparts, they murmured one to another gentle, winged words. Who on earth could blame them? No wonder the men of Troy and Argives under arms have suffered years of agony, all for her, for such a woman. Beauty, terrible beauty. A deathless goddess, so she strikes our eyes. So the Trojans are struck by Helen, and as foolish as Paris has been, they can't blame the man after they see her beauty for themselves. But Homer brings us right back to reality. But still, ravishing as she is, let her go home in the long ships and not be left behind. For us and our children, down the years, an irresistible sorrow. So yes, they're murmuring to each other that she's so beautiful, and they can't fault Paris for taking her away. But now, as Paris is squaring off with Menelaus, they're telling each other that they hope Paris loses, so Helen will go back to Sparta and this terrible war will be over. And we can imagine this is what Hector feels himself when he urges his brother to battle against Menelaus, surely knowing Menelaus is the greater man, and not caring, because 9 years into the war, Hector too just wants it to be over. So the great fight happens, they exchange spear throws, and Menelaus draws his sword and brings it down on Paris's helmet, and the sword shatters. And he cannot believe Paris's luck. So he manhandles him. He grabs the top of Paris's helmet and starts to drag Paris back to the Achaean lines. And the chin strap of the helmet is cutting into Paris's throat and choking him to death. And just then, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, whom Paris had given the golden apple to all those years ago, she whooshes in to snap the chin strap and lift Paris off the battlefield and to the safety of his chambers in the castle, where he's reunited with Helen. And Aphrodite does this in a mist, which the gods use to hide their interference with mortals. And you can imagine Menelaus raging at the Trojan lines to see where Paris has disappeared to. But the Trojans don't know any more than Menelaus, because they couldn't see through the mist. Not a single Trojan, none of their famous allies, could point out Paris to battle-hungry Menelaus. Not that they would hide him out of friendship, even if someone saw him. All of them hated him like death, black death. The Trojan men loathe Paris. His disappearance has broken the truce, and they know the war will resume with a vengeance. And so they brace for the enormous battle that will come tomorrow. And in Book 4, we get a first description of full-scale war in the Iliad. At last, the armies clashed at one strategic point. They slammed their shields together. Pike scraped pike, with the grappling strength of fighters armed in bronze, and the round shields pounded, boss on welded boss. And the sound of struggle roared and rocked the earth, screams of men and cries of triumph breaking in one breath. Fighters killing, fighters killed, and the ground streamed blood. Wildly as two winter torrents raging down from the mountains, swirling into a valley, hurl their great waters together. Flash floods from the well springs plunging down in a gorge, and miles away in the hills a shepherd hears the thunder. So from the grinding armies broke the cries and crash of war. This passage is built around the epic simile of these winter torrents, violent rivers raging down from the mountains and hurling their waters together. And how does Fagel set this up? With streamed before it. These translation decisions from Fagel's are brilliant. Homer's giving us this image of the chaos of two bodies of water smashing together, like these two armies smashing together. And Fagel uses these words to describe the movement of the water. He says, plunging down in a gorge. This isn't accidental to use plunge, like the plunge of a weapon into a man. And gorge here is used as a noun, like a crevasse the water's mixing into. But the other meaning of gorge as a verb, to gorge, is to eat savagely, like a lion gorging on the flesh of a carcass, like that image we just saw in Book 3 of Menelaus, a lion, and Paris, a carcass. Fagel chooses plunge and gorge here because he wants the violent connotations of their alternative definitions to pollute our reading of this passage about war. And now I'm going to read into it further, potentially even further than Homer or Fagel would want us to. But this line here of the shepherd, miles away in the hills, hearing the thunder, this is so great because if we read into it, that shepherd is Paris. Remember, Paris is the shepherd who chose Aphrodite in the infamous judgment of Paris. And Aphrodite is the same goddess who whisked him away to safety, miles away, where he hears the thunder of the men who his lust and cowardice have condemned to battle. From the safety of his bedchambers, this shepherd Paris hears the distant din of the cries and the crash of war. And this is what happens in the next 12 books, this fatiguing back and forth of war. We get descriptions of unbelievable violence between men, and we see these men bouncing between the guardrails of fate, which are dictated by the feuding gods. Some readers gloss over some of these books to stick with the central narrative of Achilles and Hector, which we'll pick up later. But I've said it already, I think that's a mistake. In these back and forth episodes with these other characters, we get example after example of the central theme of the Iliad, how men confront their fate. In many of these episodes, these men who are enslaved by fate find glory nonetheless. There's an entire branch of philosophy called Absurdism, and the godfather of this field is this suave French-Algerian novelist, Albert Camus. Camus so brilliantly puts his finger on the struggle against fate in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus. He talks of the insanity of man's search for meaning, and this is what he calls the absurd, that there is no meaning to our lives. And deep inside, we know this, but we search for it anyways. This is the absurd struggle, looking for something that we know isn't there. And Camus evokes the dramatic example from Greek mythology of Sisyphus, the Greek king who evades death one too many times by tricking the gods. And as punishment, he's trapped in the underworld and condemned to push a huge stone up a hill forever. Each time the stone reaches the top, the stone rolls back down and he must begin again. And Camus draws the obvious comparison to our lives. We work, we struggle, we search for meaning, and we repeat this endlessly until we die. In that cycle of up and down, Camus latches on to that moment when Sisyphus walks down the hill to start the struggle again. That hour, like a breathing space, which returns as surely as his suffering, that is the hour of consciousness. At each of those moments, when he leaves the heights and gradually sinks towards the layers of the gods, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than his rock. This is the test of Sisyphus. It's when the work is done and he's rolled the rock to the top and he heads down the mountain to do it all again. This is his moment of consciousness. Does he sulk? Does he lament his fate? No. Camus tells us he must go to his fate willingly. He must choose his fate. And this is the famous line. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. And again, in these next 12 books, we're going to see so many examples like Camus' Sisyphus, of these mortal men who fight their hearts out within the confines of fate. These men who, like Sisyphus, complete this paradox and choose their fate. The first of these men is the king of Argos, Diomedes. Book 5 is my favorite book in the whole poem. It's the Aristeia of Diomedes. This word Aristeia comes from the Greek aristos, which means best, like aristocracy, meaning the best class. An Aristeia is a hero's true moment of greatness, a period in which they absolutely dominate with unstoppable success. And there are a few of these in the Iliad, but the Aristeia of Diomedes is the most powerful. Diomedes is an extraordinary warrior. We see him in the Iliad as the second most powerful warrior behind Achilles. And he's given this moment of greatness by the goddess Athena. Remember, Athena and Hera are allied against Troy because they were scorned when Paris gave Aphrodite the golden apple of beauty. We know Athena is the goddess of wisdom, but Athena is a brutal warrior in the myths. Her cunning and her skills as a warrior make her a match for Ares, who is the raging, indiscriminate god of war. And Athena blesses Diomedes in this battle. Then Pallas Athena granted Tydeus' son Diomedes strength and daring, so the fighter would shine forth and tower over the Argives and win himself great glory. She set the man ablaze, his shield and helmet flaming with tireless fire like the star that flames at harvest, bathed in the ocean, rising up to outshine all other stars. Such fire Athena blazed from Tydides' head and shoulders, drove him into the center where the masses struggled on. Some terms here just to orient us. Pallas is an epithet for Athena. Diomedes is Tydeus' son. Remember, there are two great battles that wipe out the age of heroes. There's the Trojan War, and there's the battle against seven-gated Thebes, which we'll come to in the plays by Sophocles. Tydeus is one of those seven who fight gloriously against Thebes, and Homer honors this great lineage with the patronymic here, Tydides, son of Tydeus, which we'll use to refer to Diomedes sometimes. The Argives here are the Achaeans, the fighting force commanded by Agamemnon. We'll see Homer refer to them as Achaeans, as Danaans, and as Argives. And I like to think he uses Argives here to honor Diomedes, because Diomedes is the king of Argos. And while Argives encompasses the entire coalition, it literally means people of Argos. This description is powerful of Athena granting Diomedes strength and daring, and of her setting the man ablaze, and as seeing his armor bathed in these flames, like the star. Here's another simile, that flames at harvest, rising up to outshine all the others. And this image we're getting of Diomedes surrounded by this fiery aura is the same image we'll see each time a warrior, either for the Achaeans or the Trojans, is given an extra special blessing from a god. They're surrounded by this fire. And with this blessing, Diomedes immediately starts rampaging. He breaks the Trojan lines and he's shot by an archer. But no problem. He pulls the arrow through the wound and he rages on. And this is the feeling of an Aristeia, that even if you get shot by an arrow, there's nothing that can stop you. Athena comes to Diomedes and she lifts the mist. We already saw the mist when Aphrodite whisked Paris off the battlefield and delivered him to safety. The mist is the way that the gods can disguise themselves among mortals. The gods can use the mist for complete invisibility, like Aphrodite did, or they can use the mist to take the appearance of a mortal. And this is particularly dangerous on the battlefield, because you might think you're squaring off with a Trojan commander, when in fact you're squaring off with a god. So Athena tells Diomedes, look, I've lifted the mist from off your eyes that's blurred them up to now. So now you can tell a god from man on sight. So now if a god comes up to test your mettle, you must not fight the immortal powers head on. All but one of the deathless gods, that is. If Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, slips into battle, she's the one to stab with your sharp bronze spear. Athena tells Diomedes, okay, you now can see who is mortal and who is immortal. And I'm giving you this power so you don't directly fight the gods. This is going to keep Diomedes alive. She says, unless you see Aphrodite, she's the one you can take head on. And there's some dramatic tension here because we don't know why Athena is telling Diomedes to fight Aphrodite. Is this Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who has some real reason for why Diomedes can take Aphrodite? Is this Athena, the favorite daughter of Zeus, who knows something about the fates of her father, that Diomedes taking Aphrodite is somehow permitted in the divine will? Or is this Athena, the raging, scornful, jealous woman who will do anything to harm her more beautiful sister Aphrodite, who won the golden apple all those years ago, even if it means risking Diomedes' life? We don't know. But Diomedes isn't asking questions. This is his Aristeia, his day of greatness. So he continues rampaging through the Trojan ranks, laying waste to their men. And the great Trojan prince Aeneas sees this and says something must be done. And the audience, hearing this poem live, would pause here when they hear Aeneas, because they know that Aeneas is an extremely important man. Aeneas is from a different branch of the Trojan royal family, but he's so powerful because his mother is the goddess Aphrodite. And as we'll learn, Aeneas is fated to rule Troy. When the walls of Troy fall and the direct lineage of King Priam is wiped out, Aeneas will rise to lead these men. And so we're going to see in the poem that not just Aphrodite, all the gods, even the gods that fight against the Trojans, they all protect Aeneas because they know it's Zeus's will for him to survive. And Roman readers of the Iliad have an even more special relationship with Aeneas. After the Ides of March and the assassination of Julius Caesar, there's a power struggle between Mark Antony, who's Caesar's general and the lover of Cleopatra, and he fights against Octavian, who's Caesar's nephew. And Octavian wins, and Octavian crowns himself Augustus, which means something like divine ruler. At this point, civil war has ruined Rome for decades, and Augustus needs something to unite the people. Romans already believed that they were descended from Troy, but Augustus thinks they need a developed myth around this. So he hires a poet, Virgil, to write the Aeneid, which says that after the sack of Troy, Aeneas fled to Italy and founded Rome, and therefore all Romans are descended from Aeneas and his family. And the Romans adopt this story, the Aeneid, as a myth as important to them as the Iliad is to the Greeks. So many people across different times have a real relationship with this character, Aeneas. And one of Diomedes' friends warns him that the man approaching is Aeneas, the son of Aphrodite. And the word that his friend uses is enormous. He says Aeneas' power is enormous. And he says that they should retreat. But this is the Aristeia of Diomedes, not Aeneas. So Diomedes turns to his friend and he says, not a word of retreat. You'll never persuade me. It's not in my nature to shrink from battle, cringe in fear, with the lightning strength still steady in my chest. This is the momentum that Diomedes has. He'll face Aeneas, this man of enormous power, directly. And Diomedes can feel he still has the lightning strength in his chest. The lightning being the symbolic power of Zeus, meaning Diomedes has the blessing of the gods. And the battle ends with Diomedes hoisting an enormous boulder over his head and crashing it down on Aeneas and breaking Aeneas's hip. And just as we'd expect, Aphrodite rushes in to protect her son. And Diomedes can see her clearly because the mist's been lifted. And Athena's instructions echo in his head that she's the one to stab with your sharp bronze spear. Homer tells us he gouged her just where the wrist bone joins the palm, and immortal blood came flowing quickly from the goddess, the ichor that courses through their veins, the blessed gods. Homer doesn't directly describe the ichor, the blood of the gods, but later Greek and Roman writers describe it as shining and gold. And we have to imagine the glory of this man Diomedes, who cornered Aeneas and surely would have slain him had his immortal mother not interfered. And rather than retreat, he attacked the goddess directly and wounded her. Homer tells us the significance of this, giving us the few examples in the past of mortal heroes who had drawn blood from the gods. And the two that stand out are these examples of Heracles wounding Hera and Hades with arrows. This comparison from Homer is just giving even greater glory to Diomedes, because it's drawing a comparison to the greatest of all Greek heroes, Heracles. So with Aphrodite injured and flown off to Olympus, Diomedes goes again for Aeneas, who's on the ground with his broken hip. The description of Diomedes at this point is like a bloodthirsty lunatic, and he's raging towards Aeneas's body, which is now defended by the archer god, Apollo. 3 times Diomedes charges to kill Aeneas, and 3 times Apollo knocks him away with his shield. And on the 4th time, the archer Apollo shouts at Diomedes to bring him out of this frenzy to come to his senses. Then, at Tydides' 4th assault, like something superhuman, the archer, who strikes from worlds away, shrieked out, a voice of terror. "Think, Diomedes, shrink back now. Enough of this madness striving with the gods. We are not of the same breed. We never will be, the deathless gods and men who walk the earth." There's a respect here from Apollo of Diomedes' moment of greatness. At this point, Diomedes is alone on the battlefield, and Apollo could flick him away and end his life, but he won't do that. Because in the great balance, today is Diomedes' day. He won't let Diomedes have Aeneas because the gods have much bigger plans for him. But Apollo corrects Diomedes. I imagine like a parent setting their child in the right direction. So Apollo sweeps up the injured Aeneas and delivers him to a temple where Apollo's mother, the goddess Leto, and his sister, the goddess Artemis, can heal him. And again, this is how special this man Aeneas is, that he's defended by 2 gods, Aphrodite and Apollo, and that he's healed by 2 other gods, Leto and Artemis. And when Apollo gets back to Olympus, he says to the other gods, "Can you believe that guy Diomedes? Look at the mayhem he's causing down there. He even had the gall to charge me." And Ares, the vicious god of war, overhears this on Olympus. And we can imagine him smiling at the chaos of it, the chaos of a man charging against a god. We see these epithets throughout the poem. Swift-footed Achilles, gray-eyed Athena. The epithet for Ares is murderous Ares. Ares has some allegiances to Troy in the Iliad, but he's way less calculating than the other gods. What he really craves is total violence. Ares, the god of war, hits the ground, and he leads the Trojans on this absolute rampage. And remember, Diomedes can see through the mist, and he's looking out ahead, and he sees that it's the god of war leading the charge. And he tells his men to fall back. He's heeding the warnings of Apollo and Athena not to fight any more gods, and he wants to save his men. Up on Olympus, Queen Hera is watching the carnage that Ares is bringing to her beloved Achaeans. and she has to do something about it. So she tiptoes over to Zeus to ask him for his blessing. The goddess of love and Apollo, lord of the silver bow, they loose this maniac, Ares. He has no sense of justice. Father Zeus, I wonder if you would fume at me if I hurled a stunning blow at the god of war and drove him from the fighting. She has to check with Zeus to make sure this won't violate the divine order, and he agrees to it. He says to his wife Hera, "Leap to it then, launch Athena against him, the queen of plunder. She's the one, his match, a marvel at bringing Ares down in pain." And we get this epic imagery of Athena gearing up to directly enter the battle. Then Athena, child of Zeus, whose shield is thunder, letting fall her supple robe at the father's threshold, rich brocade, stitched with her own hands' labor, donned the battle shirt of the Lord of Lightning, buckled her breastplate geared for wrenching war, and over her shoulders slung her shield, all tassels flaring terror. Panic mounted high in a crown around it, hate and defense across it, assault to freeze the blood, and right in their midst the Gorgon's monstrous head, that rippling dragon horror, sign of storming Zeus. Then, over her brows, Athena placed her golden helmet, fronted with 4 knobs and forked with twin horns, engraved with the fighting men of 100 towns. Then, onto the flaming chariot Pallas set her feet, and seized her spear, weighted, heavy, the massive shaft she wields to break the battle lines of heroes the mighty father's daughter storms against. The objects Athena brings to battle are very important in the myths. She doesn't carry just any shield. This is Zeus's shield, the Aegis. It's a supernatural object in the myths that is so powerful, it's used as an epithet for Zeus. He's defined in terms of his shield. Zeus, whose shield is thunder. Zeus, who bears the Aegis. This shield is so powerful that Zeus's identity is intertwined with it. And the shield isn't just a defensive weapon, it's an offensive weapon too, because it freezes men with fear, which gives you an advantage to strike them. Homer tells us it's adorned with panic, hate, defense, and assault. And there's a reason that all these words are capitalized by Fagles. The shield is imbued with these divine powers. And the most iconic adornment of all is the Gorgon's monstrous head. This is the head of Medusa. After the hero Perseus slays Medusa, he gives the head to Athena, and she puts it on Zeus's shield. And this fits the shield as this divine object of terror. Because in the myths, if you look at the face of Medusa, you're turned to stone. So with this Gorgon's head mounted to the shield, this object is so powerful that it freezes the enemy in fear. Athena comes to Diomedes on the battlefield and finds him nursing his arrow wound. And he tells her that he's heeded her warning not to fight the other gods. When he saw Ares coming, he got out of there. And Athena tells him, new plan, there's nothing to fear. True son of Tydeus, Diomedes, joy of my heart, forget the orders, nothing to fear, my friend, neither Ares nor any other god. You too, I'll urge you on with so much winning force. Up now, no shrinking away here before that headlong Ares. Just look at the maniac, born for disaster, double-dealing, lying, two-faced god. Just now he promised me and Hera. The war god swore he'd fight the Trojans, stand behind the Argives. But now look, he's leading the Trojan rampage, his pledges thrown to the winds. And Athena gets in the chariot with Diomedes. Homer tells us the axle groaned beneath the weight of a great man and a terrifying goddess. And this is it, the culmination of this Aristeia. Diomedes charging in the chariot with Athena, directly challenging Ares, the rampaging god of war. Ares sees them coming, and he throws his spear hard, streaking across the battlefield straight at Diomedes. And Athena flicks it away. And now Diomedes lets out a war cry, and he throws his own spear at Ares. And Athena gives it a push to propel it with the speed of a god. and it plunges straight into Ares' gut. And the brazen god of war let loose a shriek, roaring, thundering loud as 10,000 combat soldiers shriek with Ares' fury when massive armies clash. A shudder swept all ranks, Trojans and Argives both, terror-struck by the shriek the god let loose. Ares, whose lust for slaughter never dies. This is how the Trojans and Achaeans realized this true moment of greatness for Diomedes. Because remember, only Diomedes can see the gods because Athena lifted the mist for him. But when this epic shriek of anguish, as loud as 10,000 men, sweeps across the battlefields and stops the war in its tracks, both sides realize what's just happened. Mortal Diomedes, doomed to death like the rest of them, confined by the fate of the gods, has achieved his truest moment of glory in war. He's wounded the god of war himself. In Book 6 and 7, we have a perspective shift to the Trojan prince Hector. We follow him as he storms through the citadel of Troy. He sends the most noble wives of Troy to the temple to offer a sacrifice to Athena to stop this rampage of Diomedes. And he goes to his brother Paris and tells him that he's a complete coward for disappearing from the duel with Menelaus. And he goes to his wife, Andromache, and he has a last moment with her and with his baby son. Andromache begs Hector not to return to the battle. She knows he will perish. And we learn that Andromache's father and her 7 brothers all died at the hands of Achilles. And this is the tragedy of Andromache, that this same man, Achilles, will take her husband too. Hector loves his wife, and he loves his son, and he speaks wistfully of the glory he hopes his son will have. But he knows this is a fantasy. His son will be hurled off the walls of Troy by the Achaeans, and his wife Andromache will be hauled off in tears as a war prize. And even though Hector knows this is their tragic fate, he meets this fate head on. He tells his wife, Andromache, dear one, why so desperate? Why so much grief for me? No man will hurl me down to death against my fate. And fate, no one alive has ever escaped it. Neither brave man nor coward, I tell you. It's born with us the day that we are born. When Hector gets to the battlefield, he's given courage by Apollo, and he wades out to no man's land and offers a duel in single combat to end the day's fighting. And no Achaean steps forward to meet him. Menelaus is embarrassed, so he starts to suit up, and his brother Agamemnon tells him to sit down and not to be foolish. He tells him, this is Hector, a warrior, feared even by Achilles. Menelaus is a great fighter, but everybody knows he's no match for Hector. The Achaeans eventually send forth the giant, Ajax. He's described as this enormous, powerful man. And when Hector sees him approaching, he wants to back down, but honor compels him to fight. They exchange spear throws and draw swords. And just as they're about to hack each other to bits with these swords, the heralds from each side step in to stop the fighting, because they're each too valuable to lose in this battle. And it's actually not clear what it would mean if either of them died, because no one set conditions for a truce before the duel. Each side honors the warrior's courage for accepting the duel, and they finally call off the fighting for the day. And both armies nurse their wounds back at their camps, and as they honor their dead, Zeus considers what will come next. All night long, the master strategist Zeus plotted fresh disaster for both opposing armies. Book 8 picks up the next day with Zeus calling council of the gods on Olympus. Aphrodite and Ares were wounded. Athena and Apollo fought directly on the battlefield. And Hera, as ever, was plotting fresh destruction for Troy. And Zeus has to bring order to this. This is what Homer tells us he was stewing on all night long. And Zeus tells the gods that he has a plan to bring this violent business to an end. And he tells the gods clearly, do not interfere with this plan. The fighting resumes, And Zeus goes alone to the top of Mount Ida, where he can look out over the battlefield. And here he weighs the fates of man. But once the sun stood stringing at high noon, then Father Zeus held out his sacred golden scales. In them he placed two fates of death that lays men low. One for the Trojan horsemen, one for the Argives armed in bronze. And gripping the beam mid-half, the Father raised it high, and down went Achaea's day of doom, as the fate of Troy went lifting toward the sky. And Zeus let loose a huge crash of thunder from Mount Ida, hurling his bolts in a flash against Achaea's armies. The men looked on in horror. White terror seized them all. Here we're getting right at that question that we talked about in the 6th line of the poem back in Book 1. And the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. What is the will of Zeus? And we learn from the Theogony that Zeus is conceived of the Trojan War and the battle at Seven-Gated Thebes to end the age of heroes and eliminate these great demigod warriors like Achilles. But Zeus has to navigate this war in a way that gives justice and honor to the men and gods who we've now seen clearly all have their own agendas. The night after the Aristeia of Diomedes and the duel between Ajax and Hector is when Zeus hatches his specific plan to balance the glory of gods and men in this war. It's his grand plan to give glory to Troy by helping them to beat the Achaeans back to the ships. This will satisfy Apollo and Aphrodite, and it will satisfy Achilles and his mother Thetis, who want Agamemnon to suffer. But this will enrage Hera and Athena, who hate the Trojans. And when the Achaeans are backed against the ships, he'll lure Achilles' friend Patroclus to the fight, and Hector will slay him, and this will give honor to Hector. And this tragedy will lure Achilles from his tent, and Achilles will turn the entire tide of the war. He'll beat back the Trojans, avenge Patroclus, slay Hector, and please Hera and Athena. So Zeus sets this plan, but how this plan is executed must be left to fate. And Zeus himself honors fate. We just saw him weigh the fates of Achaea and Troy to determine who would win the day. And the second the scale showed Troy, he rips his bolts of thunder down to the earth and terrorizes the Achaeans. Zeus will give victory to Troy today because fate shows him this is the best way to fulfill his plan. At one point in the battle, Diomedes rescues Nestor, the wise old king of Peleus, whose army fights with the Achaeans. And with Nestor in the chariot, Diomedes spots Hector, and he wants to go after him, and Zeus sees this and he won't let it happen. A crash of thunder. Zeus let loose a terrific bolt, and blazing white at the hoofs of Diomedes' team, it split the earth. A blinding, smoking flash, molten sulfur exploding into the air. And Nestor sees this in horror, and he cries to the much younger Diomedes in the chariot with him, "Quick, Tydides, swing these stallions round and fly. Can't you see? Victory comes from Zeus, but not for you." He hands the glory to Hector, today at least. Tomorrow it's ours, if he wants to give us glory. There's not a man alive who can fight the will of Zeus, even a man of iron. Zeus is so much stronger. Hector can feel he has Zeus's blessing, and he pushes onwards. He wants to chase the Achaeans all the way back to their ships, to set those ships on fire. This would be a total defeat of the Achaeans, because then they would have no way to retreat home. And Hera and Athena are seeing this, and they're losing their minds, because they can't do anything. They know Zeus has forbidden the gods from interfering. Hera goes to Poseidon, Zeus's brother, who's the powerful god of the sea and of earthquakes. And Hera begs him to interfere, and he says absolutely not. He does not want to fight with his brother Zeus. So Hera and Athena suit up themselves and get in their chariot. And Zeus sees them, and he threatens to hit them with his thunderbolt. And he says the wounds will be so deep it will take 10 years for their immortal bodies to heal. And he tells them that this is his will. He will give glory to Troy until Achilles rises, grappling for the body of his beloved friend Patroclus. That is when he'll turn the tides. So Zeus keeps pounding the Achaeans, and we get this great description of the end of the second day of battle. Now down in the ocean sank the fiery light of day, drawing the dark night across the grain-giving earth. For the men of Troy, the day went down against their will, but not the Argives. What a blessing! how they prayed for the nightfall coming on across their lines. I love this description of nightfall. When the events of the day are glorious and you never want it to end, the day goes down against your will. But when the day is brutal, like it is for the Argives, what a blessing how they prayed for the nightfall. Hector really thinks he has the Achaeans here, pinned against the ships. Normally the Trojans would sleep in their homes, inside the walls. But Hector orders them to camp outside. He wants to burn fires throughout the night and to keep watch over the Achaeans. He wants the glory of defeating them now, and he fears the Achaeans might flee in their ships. And that's exactly what Agamemnon is thinking of doing in Book 9. We see him back in his tent crying and complaining about the injustice of Zeus favoring the Trojans. He tells the other kings of Achaea that they should accept defeat and sail home. But old man Nestor hatches a better plan. He says what they really need is Achilles. And Agamemnon agrees, and he swallows his pride. Agamemnon sends Odysseus and a few of the other kings to Achilles' tent to offer him peace, to offer him unimaginable riches, to offer him an apology from Agamemnon, and to return the girl Briseis. And in this peace offering, the two most important speeches are the speech from Odysseus and the response from Achilles. Odysseus is the hero of the next great epic poem, the Odyssey. That poem tells the story of his 10-year journey back to Ithaca after the Trojan War. In the Iliad, Odysseus is one of the great kings of Achaea, and he's regarded as the best tactician of the Achaeans and their best speaker. Achilles respects Odysseus. Odysseus' speech is great rhetorically. It gives a very clear argument. And like the rest of the Iliad, the speech is worth reading in its entirety. But the key arguments are that the stakes couldn't be higher. The Trojans have us pinned to the ships, and Hector will torch them and rout us all. And the great warrior Achilles should do something about it before it's too late. Because if he doesn't, the guilt will haunt Achilles forever. And because it's the duty that Achilles was charged with by his father Peleus, the king of Theia, to suppress the whims of the individual and fight for his friends and Theia's allies. Then Odysseus lists all the gifts offered by Agamemnon, including the return of Briseis. And he tells Achilles that even if he hates Agamemnon so much that he won't accept the gifts, he should accept the true gift of this opportunity, which is the honor he'll receive from his brothers in arms by saving them, and the personal glory he'll get from being the only man great enough to defeat Hector. These arguments from Odysseus are meant to appeal to a sense of heroism in Achilles. He tries to motivate Achilles with the oath he swore to his father, his loyalty to his friends, and his pursuit of personal glory. These are all core ideas in ancient Greece about being a good man. But Achilles doesn't care about any of it. No, what lasting thanks in the long run for warring with our enemies on, no end. One and the same lot for the man who hangs back and the man who battles hard. The same honor waits for the coward and the brave. They both go down to death. This is the profundity of this character of Achilles, that he sees right through all of it to what actually matters, that he's going to die. He knows that he wears the shackles of fate the tightest in this story. We've known it from the second line, murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses. He is doomed to die, and in this truth, he has incredible freedom. Some men like Diomedes in Book 5 may risk their lives for that one incredible moment of glory, like when he fought alongside Athena in the chariot and wounded the god of war Ares. Other men, like Odysseus, may go to hell and back out of duty to their comrades in their oaths, but not Achilles. In his tragically short life, Achilles won't fight for glory. He won't fight for duty. And he certainly won't fight for King Agamemnon, a man he despises. He's so in tune with his own mortality. But a man's life breath cannot come back again. No raiders in force, no trading brings it back once it slips through a man's clenched teeth. And this awareness of the finality of death gives him incredible freedom. He lays up for the men his two fates. Mother tells me that two fates bear me on to the day of death. If I hold out here and I lay siege to Troy, My journey home is gone, but my glory never dies. If I voyage back to the fatherland I love, my pride, my glory dies. True, but the life that's left me will be long. The stroke of death will not come on me quickly. These are the two fates of Achilles. He can chase glory and live a short life, or he can surrender his glory and live a long life. Whether he chooses the former or the latter, the choice will be his. He won't be compelled by Agamemnon or duty or anything else, because none of these things will save him from his fate. The Roman philosopher Seneca would point out here that every man faces this same choice. Do we give our years to the pursuit of glory, to achievement in work or public office? Or do we live our lives for enjoyment and accept that we'll have no public honors and will be forgotten after we die? Seneca urges us to choose the latter, to understand that death is the great equalizer, and we should live our lives for ourselves, not for honor. The kings go back to Agamemnon to tell him Achilles has rejected his peace offer, and the Achaeans despair. Agamemnon is so nervous about the next day's battle, he can't sleep that night. And in Book 10, he starts wandering around in the middle of the night, and he finds that his brother Menelaus can't sleep. And so they wake up the other kings, and they hatch a plan. They'll send 2 spies behind enemy lines to see if the Trojans truly keep watch. They're thinking maybe if the Trojans are asleep, they'll be able to strike under the dark cover of night and surprise the Trojans and win back some of the advantage. So Diomedes and Odysseus set off to spy on the Trojans, and they see a lone Trojan heading towards the Achaean camp, and they realize the Trojans have sent their own spy. So Diomedes and Odysseus circle behind the Trojan spy, and there's this really funny moment where the Trojan spy thinks it's his fellow Trojans coming behind him to tell him there's been a change of plans. And then he realizes it's Diomedes and Odysseus who have circled behind him, and he runs for his life. They catch him, and Odysseus interrogates him. And the first question he asks him is really smart. He says, "Who put you up to this?" He can tell this is a soldier of no rank. So he wants to know, were you sent by Hector? Or did you hatch this plan on your own in search of glory? And the Trojan spy, Dolon, tells them whatever they want to know. He says he was sent by Hector to see if the Achaeans were planning a fast retreat in their ships, or if maybe the day's fighting had drained their energy and they weren't keeping a proper watch. Odysseus and Diomedes ask Dolon of the locations of each of the major Trojan warlords and allies, and he tells them everything they want to know. He tells them the Thracian camp will make the easiest target right now. So Odysseus and Diomedes sneak up on the Thracians, and they surprise attack them and kill their king and their best men. And they steal their legendary horses and race all the way back to the Achaean camp. This midnight raid feels like its own contained episode, and it's a really fun read, but it doesn't fundamentally change the balance of the war. Dawn comes the next day, and the Achaeans are still in a dire situation. And when they begin the fighting, it's Agamemnon who leads the charge in Book 11, which is the Aristeia of Agamemnon. We get this long description of him suiting up in this kingly armor, and he fights viciously, beating the Trojans all the way back to the Scaean gates, the front gates of Troy. And Zeus sends a message to Hector through the messenger god Iris to wait until Agamemnon is injured before he charges. Sure enough, Agamemnon's hit and he retreats to the tents. Then Diomedes is hit and he retreats to the tents. And Odysseus sees this and knows the gods are favoring the Trojans. But duty and honor compel him. This is the same element of his character that we saw in his speech to Achilles. Odysseus is motivated by duty. He says, "Cowards, I know, would quit the fighting now. But the man who wants to make his mark in war must stand his ground and brace for all he's worth. Suffer his wounds or wound his man to death." And Odysseus takes a stand, and he's encircled, and he too is wounded, and he calls for help. And the giant Ajax and Menelaus come to his defense. And Hector is now close to the battle, but he's weary to jump into it directly. He remembers the one-on-one duel he fought at the end of the first day's fighting with Ajax, where he was almost beat by Ajax. And in this fight now, each time Ajax comes close to Hector, Zeus pushes Ajax back. In Zeus's grand plan, it's Achilles' fate to defeat Hector. Ajax knows that Hector's protected by the gods, so he fights as he retreats back to the ships. And now the battle's close enough to the ships that Achilles rises out of his tent to see what's going on. And he sees men retreating, and he sees other men injured. And he tells his best friend Patroclus to go to the old King Nestor's tent to get the full update. Nestor tells Patroclus that this is the last possible moment for Achilles to do something. Their healer, Machaon, is wounded. Agamemnon, Diomedes, and Odysseus are all wounded. And he begs Patroclus to reason with Achilles. He says if Achilles waits any longer for a moment of greater glory, there won't be any Achaeans to give him that glory. And Nestor gives Patroclus a backup plan. He says if Achilles still won't join the fight himself, then at least he should let Patroclus lead Achilles' army, the Myrmidons, to save the Achaeans. And Patroclus should wear Achilles' armor into the battle, so the Trojans from far away will think it's Achilles, and this will stop their assault. This is the will of Zeus. The Achaeans had to get beat back to the ships. Achilles had to send Patroclus to Nestor. Nestor had to come up with this backup plan in total desperation of Patroclus wearing Achilles' armor. And now Patroclus must convince Achilles. And as Patroclus is on his way back to Achilles' tent, he sees his friend, Eurypylus. He has an arrow buried in his leg. And this is a brilliant literary setup from Homer, because it's going to give an emotional complement to the rational request that Nestor just made. With this arrow sticking out of his leg, Eurypylus begs his friend Patroclus to help him, and he tells him that only Patroclus can save him. And spread the soothing, healing salves across it, the powerful drugs they say you learn from Achilles. And Chiron, the most humane of centaurs, taught your friend. This appeal from Eurypylus is reinforcing the specialness of Patroclus. Achilles has been trained by Chiron, the great centaur who trained Heracles. Patroclus's proximity to Achilles for all of these years makes him a special man too. And Eurypylus gives him an opportunity to apply that specialness in this small way to treat the wound. And Patroclus heals it easily using some crushed bitter roots. This is the emotional motivation for Patroclus to go to the tent and convince Achilles that they should do something. For book 12, we cut back to the battle, and this is probably my second favorite book of the poem. It's the story of the Trojans storming the ramparts. To give a lay of the land, there's Troy, the grasslands, and the beach with the ships. And in front of the ships, the Achaeans have built some fortifications. There's a huge trench with spikes sticking out of it. And they build this so that the Trojans will have to dismount their chariots and cross the trench on foot. And across the trench, right before the ships, is a defensive wall, a rampart, that the Achaeans have built as a last line of defense. If the rampart falls, the Achaeans are totally doomed, because then there's nothing stopping the Trojans from burning the ships. And this rampart isn't very strong. It's been built hastily by these men who have been at war for so long, with whatever materials they have access to locally, and whatever they can get in from shipping boats from Mycenae. But the real reason this wall isn't strong is because in the rush to build it, the Achaeans didn't make the proper sacrifices. In ancient Greece, if you build anything of any substance, you have to ask the gods for permission and offer sacrifices to them and perform rituals. And the Greeks don't do this. And the gods notice this. Poseidon especially notices this because this wall butts up to the sea, which is his domain. And because in the myths, Poseidon and Apollo built the walls of Troy themselves. Poseidon and Apollo angered Zeus once, and as punishment, he sent them to Earth to serve a human king for a year. And that king was Laomedon, Priam's father. And Poseidon, back in book 7, wonders aloud to Zeus if now people will forget the great walls of Troy, because opposite from them, the Achaeans have built their own wall by the ships. And Zeus cannot believe his brother. He cannot believe that the sea god is thinking about something so petty. He says, "Unbelievable, God of the earthquake, you with your massive power. Why are you moaning so?" Zeus tells him that after the war, Poseidon can go knock down the wall if he really wants. And I laughed at this when I read it for the first time, because I imagine Zeus looking at his god of a brother like a little boy on the beach, whining because the other kid built a bigger sandcastle, and patting him on the head and saying he can go knock down the sandcastle after the other kid goes home. So the first of the Trojans make it through the spikes and across the trench, and they charge ahead at the gate of the rampart because they see the gate is open. Now the gate is open because the Argives are still retreating. So there's this group of Trojans led by a warlord, Odysseus, who charges ahead to try to burst through the gates before they close. And just when he gets there, these two great Achaean warriors plant themselves in front of the gates, absolutely fearless. This is going to be their epic last stand. The entire army of Troy is crossing the trench and coming for that gate, and these two Achaean men hold their ground. And Homer calls Odysseus and the first wave of Trojans who rush headlong at the open gates idiots. Idiots. There in the gates they found two men, a brace of two great fighters, lion-hearted sons of the Lapith spearmen. One, Pirithous' offspring, rugged Polypoetes. The other, Leonteus, a match for murderous Ares. Both warriors, planted there before the towering gates, rose like oaks that rear their crests on a mountain ridge, standing up to the gales and driving rains day in, day out, their giant roots branching, gripping deep in the earth. So these two, trusting all to their arms, their power, stood up to Odysseus' headlong charge and never shrank. Homer uses the simile of a solid oak tree here, an oak tree atop a mountain ridge that can endure wind and rain and is unmoved by all of it because its roots go so deep. These are two great warriors. These two men go on an absolute rampage, cutting down the Trojans who are stupid enough to think they charge through an open gate. And the smarter Trojans, who are hanging back and still slowly crossing the trench, they see this and they start to think twice. Maybe they should make a different plan. And right then, they see a terrible omen. An eagle in the sky clutching a monstrous, bloody serpent in its talons. And this massive serpent is still alive, and it whips up and bites the eagle. And the eagle drops it right at the feet of the Trojans, who completely freak out. And this one Trojan, Polydamas, he's always a nervous man and always seems to be lingering by Hector. He reads the omen. The Trojans are the eagle, thinking they have the Achaeans in their grasp, like the bloodied snake. But they have to be careful, lest the Achaeans bite them back before they get home. And Hector, who had all this momentum, turns to Polydamas and tells him, "Forget the bird. I answer to Zeus." "Enough, Polydamas. You tell me to forget the plans of storming Zeus, all he promised me when he nodded in assent? You tell me to put my trust in birds? No, put our trust in the will of mighty Zeus, king of the deathless gods and men who die." Bird signs, "Fight for your country. That is the best, the only omen." And Hector defies the omen and leads the charge against the gates. And Hector is instantly vindicated when Zeus lets loose a dust storm that smashes the Achaean ships. And the Trojans are pounding against the gates, and the two Lapiths are fighting valiantly, and the Achaeans are hurling huge stones off the ramparts that are smashing the Trojans left and right. And Zeus decides that wall will come down, and he sends his own mortal son, the demigod Trojan ally, Sarpedon, to do it. He gives his own son this moment of glory. And as Sarpedon prepares to rush in, he turns to his fellow Lycian leader, Glaucus, and he asks him, "Glaucus, why do they hold us both in honor, first by far with pride of place, choice meats and brimming cups, in Lycia, where all our people look on us like gods? Why make us lords of estates along the Xanthus' banks, rich in vineyards and plowland rolling wheat. So that now the duty's ours. We are the ones to head our Lycian front, brace and fling ourselves in the blaze of war. This is Sarpedon's musing about the trade-off of this princely life he's led. He's been showered at home with honor, and he's had his choice of the best meats and the best wine and the best estates on the riverfront. And why? Why have his people given him these honors? Because he's bound to them now by duty. Because now, in this horrible war, he is the one to fling himself in the blaze of war. And he and Glaucus charge a different section of the wall, and this splits the Achaeans, who are furiously throwing rocks and flinging arrows off the wall. And an arrow hits Sarpedon's friend Glaucus, and then Sarpedon himself gets hit. But nothing will stop his moment of glory. He spears an Achaean and claws at the rampart with his bare hands, and with inhuman strength, the demigod son of Zeus brings a huge portion of the wall crashing down. Homer tells us the breach is large enough for hundreds of men to pass through. And Sarpedon calls to his countrymen, the Lycians, and they charge at the hole in the wall. So now we have the Lycians and the Argives desperately fighting in this hole in the wall. And we still have the Lapiths and the Argives desperately fighting in a different area in front of the gates. And Zeus gives the greatest glory to Hector. He gives him the strength to lift a boulder so heavy that no two normal men could lift it. And he takes aim at the two thick doors with two huge bars on the inside pinning them in place. And Hector throws the boulder with all of his might. The door bars could not hold. The planking shattered up in a flying storm of splinters under the rock's force. And Hector burst through in glory, his face dark as the sudden rushing night, but he blazed on in bronze, and terrible fire broke from the gear that wrapped his body. 2 spears in his fists. No one could fight him, stop him, none but the gods, as Hector hurtled through the gates, and his eyes flashed fire. And whirling round, he cried to his Trojans, shouting through the rock, "The wall! Storm the wall!" To me, this is Hector's shining moment. He has the cunning not to rush the open gate like the idiot Asius. He ignores the omen of the eagle and the serpent and puts his total faith in the direct words of Zeus. And he does his own bidding. On the battlefield, he is the leader of Troy. So it's him who hoists the boulder, and he is the first man to step through the wall. And like Diomedes in his Aristeia, Hector bursts into flames with this aura of glory from the gods. In books 13 through 15, we have a back and forth between the armies at the ships. Book 13 actually starts with Zeus having something else to do. He has to turn his attention to a war breaking out between the Thracians and some other northern tribes. We can think of this other battle as taking place somewhere in modern-day northern Turkey. We presume this was a notable battle if Homer is saying here that it took Zeus's attention away from Troy. And presumably, the audience hearing the Iliad reciting aloud would have known something about this battle. So as is usually the case, when Homer thinks the audience already knows it, he skips the story. So this is lost to history. There are no other sources telling us what happened in this war between these 4 northern tribes. But when Zeus turns his attention to the north, the rhapsode tells us, Zeus never dreamed in his heart a single deathless god would go to war for Troy's or Achaea's forces now. Zeus had made it very clear to the gods, don't interfere with my plan. And of course, that's exactly what happens. While Zeus is away, Poseidon, our crybaby on the beach, wants to have his fun. He's still upset about the wall that the Achaeans built, but now that some of the wall has come down, he can come to his senses and remember that he really despises the Trojans. We already talked about Poseidon's punishment for a year on Earth, building the walls of Troy, and he was actually cheated out of payment by Priam's father, Laomedon. So he holds a grudge against the Trojans. He has another reason, though, too, to fight with the Achaeans, because his demigod grandson, Amphimachus, is himself an Achaean, and we'll meet him in this book 13. So baby Poseidon is stewing on this. He's seeing the Achaeans struggling, And he's pouting because his brother Zeus said he can't do anything about it. But with Zeus gone, Poseidon jumps in the action. And Homer gives us a really fun description of how Poseidon transports himself to the battle. Poseidon is perched atop a mountain watching the action, and he takes 3 powerful strides which shake the earth, and on the 4th stride he arrives at the port. He dives under the water to his city built of gold to retrieve his horses and his chariot, and they launch up onto the water and they race, skimming across the waves, as dolphins jump and play in his wake. And Homer tells us that the sea heaved in joy, cleaving a path for him as he raced to the shores of Troy. When he emerges on the beach, he finds pandemonium. But the Trojans swarmed like flame, like a whirlwind, following Hector, son of Priam, blazing on non-stop, their war cries shattering, crying as one man, their hopes soaring to take the Argive ships and slaughter all their best against the hulls. We see this imagery everywhere in these 3 books of fire. They swarmed like a flame, and Hector was blazing on. These similes and metaphors of the Trojans as fire are reminding us of the stakes here and of their mission, which is to set the Argive ships ablaze. And we'll also see references to wind, like a whirlwind, because again, this adds to the stakes. Wind is the kindling for fire to spread. We see this metaphorically with the Trojan army described like this wind that spreads the flame. And we'll see this literally later when Homer tells us that it was a windy day. And this makes it feel extra dangerous. And of course, with the threat of the element of fire and with the element of wind, Poseidon, as the sea god, represents the exact elemental power, water, that can stop the fire of the Trojans. Poseidon doesn't directly fight, but he whips up strength in the Argives. He does this by enchanting some of them. The giant Ajax, for example, says that he feels the power rising within him. Most of Poseidon's work, though, is done via speeches, and he does this by taking the form of Calchas, the Achaean seer. And this speech is interesting because even though Poseidon has taken the form of a man, you can tell rhetorically so clearly that this is a god speaking, because he brutally criticizes Agamemnon and Achilles. He calls Agamemnon weak, and he calls Achilles a worthless coward. Of all the Achaeans, the real human, Calchas, especially wouldn't criticize them like this. Back in Book 1, when Apollo was infecting the Achaeans with plague, and Achilles asked Calchas to read the omens and tell them why, Calchas initially refuses because he knew it was Agamemnon's fault, and he was so scared of crossing Agamemnon. He actually begged Achilles to protect him if he speaks the truth, because the only person he fears more than Agamemnon is the great Achilles. This is a great literary choice by Homer, to pick Calchas as the human form that Poseidon takes, so that the audience and the other characters in the story clock the urgency of this speech through the radical shift in tone from the conciliatory Calchas in Book 1 to the alarmist Calchas in Book 13. And this speech from Poseidon as Calchas is so effective because he has the courage to say what all the Achaeans are thinking. They're thinking, how in the world did we get here, so desperate, jammed up against the ships? They're thinking, we had the upper hand for months. Then Agamemnon foolishly crossed Achilles, and Achilles has shrunk from the fighting ever since, crying in his tent like a child. Poseidon gives this ground. He says, sure, what if Agamemnon's to blame for all of this? What if Achilles is a worthless coward? It doesn't change the fact that it's you who's here right now, pinned against the ships. But you, I round on you with all my heart. Weaklings, you'll make the crisis worse at any moment with this hanging back. Each of you get a grip on yourself. Where's your pride, your soldier's sense of shame? A great battle rises before us. Poseidon appeals here to the virtues of duty and heroism that are so important to the Greeks. He's telling them to find their sense of pride and shame and fight. So the Argives charge and the Trojans charge, and the image Homer uses is a knot, We can imagine these two forces fighting each other in close quarters, with the ships at the back of the Argives, and the damaged rampart at the backs of the Trojans. And in the thick of this knot is Menelaus, battling with his back to the ships, eye to eye with these ravaging Trojans. And he calls up to Zeus, "Look how you favor them, these reckless Trojans. Their fury always in uproar. No one can ever slake their thirst for blood, for the great leveler, war. One can achieve his fill of all good things, even of sleep, even of making love. Rapturous song in the beat and sway of dancing. A man will yearn for his fill of all these joys before his fill of war. But not these Trojans. No one can glut their lust for battle." He's complaining to Zeus, but Menelaus is actually setting up here a profound bit of philosophy that Homer's going to pay off in Book 18 with the description of the artwork on Achilles' shield. As we'll see, the shield is designed to show all the joys of life, not just the glory of war, but the beauty of the harvest and of dancing and feasting. And this is the realization that Menelaus has here as he's pinned up against the ships, that man will yearn for all these good things before he yearns for war. This is a similar feeling to what Achilles says when he's rebutting Odysseus' speech in the tent, when he meditates on the finality of death and questions why he should rush towards death in this war. Each of these episodes is an acknowledgement that there are more radiant facets to life than war. But not the Trojans, at least according to Menelaus. Menelaus here thinks the Trojans are broken men who crave war more than they crave these good things, and who can never sate their thirst for war. No one can glut their lust for battle. We get just a little hint here of the Greek belief that they're more sophisticated than the Trojans, that the Greeks wish for love and song and dance, while these barbaric Trojans take the wives of other men and lust for war. And we know, of course, that that's not entirely true. The Trojans would have said the same thing about Diomedes, that he had a lust for war when he was rampaging like a madman, bouncing off the god Apollo 4 different times. Or the two Lapiths, when they abandoned all sense of self-preservation and single-handedly defended the rampart gate. Nobody could glut the lust of battle of these men either. One element here is momentum. It's powerful to move with the tidal wave of momentum in war, like Diomedes riding along in the chariot with Athena. Some of it is duty. This is what Sarpedon told us in Book 12 when he turned to his friend Glaucus and said they were among the most honored men in Lycia, with their choice of meats and wines and properties along the riverbanks, because they accepted their duty to defend their country and her allies. And it's this duty that sends Sarpedon charging so bravely to tear down the rampart wall with his bare hands. But I think there's this other philosophy in the Iliad, which says that it's not about individual glory, like Diomedes sought with momentum at his back. And it's not about the duty that Sarpedon sought to live up to when he charged the rampart wall. What if glory and duty are stupid pursuits, delusions meant to help us cope with death and the immutability of fate? This is what Menelaus is realizing here, that there are things in life so much better than war. So why rush towards death? And again, it's the same philosophy Achilles has when Odysseus confronts him in the tent. And Achilles asks, why? Death comes for us all. Why bring it on faster in this senseless war? And as Menelaus is wondering this, as he's caught in the knot of battle, Hector spears Poseidon's demigod grandson, Amphimachus, and this enrages Poseidon even more. And Homer takes an aside here to acknowledge this battle of will between Zeus and Poseidon, with Zeus backing the Trojans and Poseidon backing the Argives. The two powerful sons of Cronus, Zeus and Poseidon, their deathless spirits warring against each other. We're building mortal pains for seasoned heroes. Zeus willing a Trojan victory, Hector's victory, lifting the famous runner Achilles' glory higher. But he had no lust to destroy the whole Argive force before the walls of Troy. All the father wanted was glory for Thetis and Thetis' strong-willed son. But Poseidon, surging in secret out of the gray surf, went driving into the Argive ranks and lashed them on, agonized for the fighters beaten down by the Trojans, and his churning outrage rose against great Zeus. Both were gods of the same line, a single father, but Zeus was the elder born, and Zeus knew more. And so Poseidon shrank from defending allies out in the open, all in secret. Always armed like a man, the god kept urging armies on. Both gods knotted the rope of strife and leveling war, strangling both sides at once by stretching the mighty cable, never broken, never slipped, that snapped the knees of thousands. We're getting a window into the dynamic between Poseidon and Zeus, and the battle of their wills. We see that Zeus doesn't want to wipe out the Achaeans. He just wants to inflict enough pain that he honors Thetis and her son Achilles. He needs enough danger so that Achilles will send Patroclus into the fight. But Poseidon just sees Zeus handing glory to the Trojan prince Hector, who just killed Poseidon's demigod grandson and whose grandfather disrespected him. And we see this great nautical imagery here for the sea god, that he's surging for the Argives. But he operates in secret, armed like a man. Poseidon has to disguise himself as a man. We saw him take the form of the seer Calchas earlier after Zeus commanded in Book 8 that the other gods not interfere. But when Poseidon takes the form of a man, he's not hiding from Zeus. He's showing Zeus that he's reducing his own influence in the war to that of a man. As we saw when Athena joined Diomedes on his chariot in Book 5, the gods can unleash their true power when they enter the battle as themselves. When Poseidon takes the form of a man, the best he can do is give speeches. And we get this incredible metaphor here of a rope pulled tight. On one end by the will of Zeus, and on the other end by the will of Poseidon. And caught in the knot in the middle are the armies, strangled by these higher powers. And this will, this tension, it won't break, it won't slip, it will snap the knees of thousands, knock them down to their death. This is the payoff of the word leveling at the start of the metaphor. And into Book 14, Poseidon is doing his best, motivating the Greeks in secrecy. We sense his power when he unleashes a dust storm by streaking across the battlefield. A shattering cry, and he surged across the plain, thundering loud as 10,000 combat soldiers. Hera knows Poseidon is capable of so much more, but she can see Zeus keeping a watchful eye over Poseidon. She needs to distract Zeus, so she develops a plan to seduce him and put him to sleep. She gets an enchanted necklace from Aphrodite, and she convinces the god of sleep to put Zeus to sleep. And after they make love, the plan works. The god of sleep rushes down to the ships to find Poseidon and tell him that Zeus is asleep. And now is the time to fight for the Argives with all your might. Now give them glory, if only a moment's glory. Poseidon presents himself to the Greeks, and he tells them to all grab huge shields and follow him into battle. And he personally leads the charge headlong against the Trojans. Ajax hits Hector with a huge boulder, and this knocks him down, and the Argives chase the Trojans back in a panic, past the wall, past the stakes, and across the trench. And this is what Zeus wakes up to in Book 15. He sees Hector heaving blood on the floor, the Trojans running for their lives, and his brother Poseidon leading the charge. He turns to Hera, and she instantly lies. She says, "I would never cross you. It was Poseidon. He must have been acting out of his own rage." And Zeus is smart here. He tells her, "Okay, thank you for standing by my side. I'm so grateful you'll be supporting my plan for this war." Because now he has her locked in. She lied to defend herself, and I think that Zeus knows this, and he's used the lie to tie her up for the rest of the war. Because if she crosses him again, she'll be implying that she also crossed him while he slept. So Zeus sends a messenger to his brother Poseidon to say enough. And he sends his son Apollo to heal Hector and to rally the Trojans to fight back to the ships. Zeus tells the gods of Olympus no more interfering. He tells them the Trojans will be defeated, but first they must rouse Patroclus to battle. only after Patroclus has rampaged against the Trojans and slain Zeus's own demigod son, Sarpedon. Only then will Hector slay Patroclus and have his moment of glory. And this will lure Achilles from his tent and fulfill the promise that he made to Thetis. It's the inclusion of Sarpedon's death in this plan, Zeus's own demigod son, that I think keeps the gods from interfering any further. Zeus so believes in this plan that he's willing to sacrifice his own son. Ares had just lost a son of his own in the battle, and Athena sees him suiting up to go down and defy Zeus's orders. And Athena has wise words for him. So now I tell you, drop this anger for your son. By now some fighter, better than he, a stronger hand, has gone down in his own blood, or soon will go. It's no small labor to rescue all mankind, every mother's son. This is the pain all the gods feel, that they cannot save their sons from this battle, and that the will of Zeus, this driving force of the entire poem, requires sacrifice from everyone to balance everything. So the gods sit by and let Hector turn the tides all the way back to the ships, where the great Ajax has taken this desperate last stand, jumping from ship to ship with a huge pike, stabbing down at the Trojans to keep them off the ships. But even he can't keep them from encircling him with their torches. And we cut from this cliffhanger of the Trojans hurling their torches to Patroclus bursting into Achilles' tent in tears at the beginning of Book 16. Patroclus in this story is just a pawn. He's used by Nestor to give relief to the Achaean forces, and he's sacrificed by Zeus to lure Achilles from his tent. We can tell that Homer has great sympathy for Patroclus because he uses this rhetorical device, the apostrophe, where he speaks directly to the character. When Achilles asks Patroclus why he's crying, Homer says, "With a wrenching groan, you answered your friend, Patroclus, O my rider." The narrator, Homer, uses the word you here, sympathetically speaking directly to Patroclus. And after Patroclus makes his plea for Achilles to do something, and if not, to at least let Patroclus ride out in his armor, Homer again shows sympathy towards him. So he pleaded, lost in his own great innocence, condemned to beg for his own death and brutal doom. Achilles' response to Patroclus' speech is very famous. He says, "Enough, let bygones be bygones now, done is done. How on earth can a man rage on forever?" This line here, how on earth can a man rage on forever? Achilles is softened by his friend's plea. Achilles still won't join the fight himself, but in the same breath, he tells Patroclus he can wear the armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle to beat back the Trojans. But he warns Patroclus, do not fight all the way to Troy. Once you have whipped the enemy from the fleet, you must come back, Patroclus. Even if Zeus, the thundering lord of Hera, lets you seize your glory, you must not burn for war against these Trojans. Madmen, lusting for battle, not without me. You will only make my glory that much less. You must not, lost in the flush and fire of triumph, slaughtering Trojans outright, drive your troops to Troy. What if one of the gods who never die comes down from Olympus heights to intervene in battle? The deadly archer loves his Trojans dearly. No, you must turn back, soon as you bring the light of victory to the ships. Let the rest of them cut themselves to pieces on the plain. This warning from Achilles of what could go bad is incredibly specific. And the warning foreshadows, of course, exactly how Patroclus will die. As Patroclus is arming himself for battle, Achilles goes to rouse the Myrmidon warriors, to prepare them to follow Patroclus. There's 50 ships of men with 50 warriors each, so 2,500 Myrmidons. And they've all been waiting for their chance for glory. And Achilles tells them, now is their moment. And as he says that, he looks out and he sees the first ship go up in flames. So there's a real urgency here. Patroclus puts on Achilles' famous armor, which has stars emblazoned on the breastplate. And this is how the armor will be recognizable from so far away. The only bit of Achilles' kit that Patroclus can't take is Achilles' heavy ashwood spear, which was given to Achilles' father by the centaur Chiron. Achilles in the myths is the only hero strong and skilled enough to wield that spear. And Patroclus leads the Myrmidons into battle. And as Zeus and Nestor predicted, just the sight of the armor is enough to send the Trojans running. The Trojans, soon as they saw Menelaus' gallant son, himself and his loyal driver flare in brazen gear, all their courage quaked. Their columns buckled, thinking swift Achilles had tossed to the winds his hard rage that held them back by the ships, and chosen friendship toward the Argives now. Each Trojan soldier glancing left and right. How could he run from sudden, plunging death? So Patroclus and the Myrmidons chase the Trojans away from the ships, past the rampart, and into the trench. Hector knows the tide has turned, and he gets to safety on his chariot. Hector is smart enough to bide his time. And the motion Homer describes here is an arc, that Patroclus is in his chariot, and just as a stream of Trojans get away on foot, Patroclus arcs around to cut them off. And there's this poetic justice as Patroclus is pushing the Trojans back to the ships and slaughtering them, just as they had done to his fellow Achaeans. Now Sarpedon, the great demigod son of Zeus, who had torn down the Argives' wall with his bare hands, he sees Patroclus rampaging in his chariot, and he calls to his men, the Lycians, allies of Troy. Lycians, where's your pride? Where are you running? Now, be fast to attack. I'll take him on myself, see who he is who routs us, wreaking havoc against us, cutting the legs from under squads of good, brave men. We see this sense of duty in Sarpedon, the man who knows that bravery in war is the price he must pay for luxuries at home. He asks his men where their pride is. And this is interesting. He looks to Patroclus in Achilles' armor, and he says, I'll take him on myself, see who he is who routs us. There's a suspicion here that it might not actually be Achilles. We don't know what Sarpedon is thinking. Maybe he's noticed that Patroclus isn't wielding Achilles' spear. Maybe he's noticed that Patroclus is moving in a different way from Achilles. Maybe he picked that up in previous battles with Achilles. But in any case, he sees something different about Patroclus. And this glimmer gives him enough bravery to leap from his own chariot and face this man down. And this is heart-wrenching for Zeus on Olympus. My cruel fate, my Sarpedon, the man I love the most, my own son, doomed to die at the hands of Menelaus' son, Patroclus. My heart is torn in two as I try to weigh all this. Shall I pluck him up now, while he's still alive, and set him down in the rich green land of Lycia, far from the war at Troy and all its tears? Or beat him down at Patroclus' hands at last? Zeus now feels firsthand what the other gods have felt as they've seen their demigod sons slain in this battle. Zeus thinks about plucking Sarpedon out of the battle, like Aphrodite did with Paris, or like Apollo did with Aeneas, but Hera tells him he can't. If he breaks his own rules and violates the laws of fate, then none of the Olympian gods will respect him again. And Hera makes it clear here that there's a hierarchy. In the cosmic balance, it's much more important to preserve order among the gods than it is to save any man's life. Dread Majesty, son of Cronus, what are you saying? A man, a mere mortal, his doom sealed long ago. You'd set him free from all the pains of death. Do as you please, Zeus, but none of the deathless gods will ever praise you. Hera calls him here a mere mortal. We hear that there's this hierarchy, that he's lower than the gods. His doom sealed long ago. He was always going to die because he's immortal. Zeus knows that he must let Sarpedon go if he's to fulfill his plan. And Homer tells us that Zeus showered tears of blood that drenched the earth. Showers in praise of him, his own dear son, the man Patroclus was just about to kill, on Troy's fertile soil, far from his fatherland. So Sarpedon is stabbed by Patroclus, and Sarpedon's dying words to his friend Glaucus are begging his friend to protect his dead body and his armor. And this is the Greek belief that we talked about in the introduction, about the importance of armor and bodies to heroes. The armor is an object of remembrance. If the Argives strip Sarpedon's armor, they keep it like a trophy. But if the Trojans return Sarpedon's armor to his family in Lycia, his family will keep it as a memory of him. So there's a value to the object of the armor. There's a more serious value to the body itself, because there's a whole burial rite they have to go through to ensure that the body travels properly to the underworld. So there's an eternity of non-existence or damnation on the line here if the Trojans can't properly bury the body. If the Argives take the body, they can bewitch it or defile it for propaganda value. And because they know the Trojans need the body back so badly to bury it, the Argives know that if they take the body, it's going to psychologically weaken their opponent. So Zeus is watching this fight over his son's body, and he's thinking about how he can use it to his advantage to carry out his plan. He needs Patroclus to keep chasing Hector. So he tells Hector to retreat, he allows the Achaeans to strip the armor of his demigod son, and he sends the god Apollo to carry Sarpedon's body off the battlefield and return it to his family in Lycia. With Patroclus winning the armor of Sarpedon and Hector in retreat, this is the exact bait that Zeus needs for Patroclus to carry on to the walls of Troy in defiance of Achilles' warning. And Patroclus takes the bait. Patroclus went for Troy's and Lycia's lines, blind in his fatal frenzy, luckless soldier. If only he had obeyed Achilles' strict command, he might have escaped his doom, the stark night of death. But the will of Zeus will always overpower the will of men. Zeus, who strikes fear in even the bravest man of war and tears away his triumph, all in a lightning flash. And at other times, he will spur a man to battle, just as he urged Patroclus' fury now. So like we said earlier, Patroclus is a total pawn here. He has zero free will. Homer tells us he had no chance of obeying Achilles' command because Zeus baits him, and the will of Zeus will always overpower the will of man. Once Zeus sets the direction of fate, there's no changing it. Hesiod tells us in his Works and Days that sickness wanders among men in silence because Zeus, in his cunning, took away its voice. So disease is this powerful example to the Greeks of the inescapability of Zeus's punishment, impossible to avoid, an invisible, silent killer of men. And it's no accident that Fagles uses this word, soldier. Granted, Patroclus had his own mini Aristeia here, beating the Trojans back from the ships and chasing them all the way to the gates of Troy. But he's no hero. He is no tactician or king. He's a soldier who was sent on a mission by Nestor, given a command by Achilles, and manipulated by Zeus. So Patroclus gets to the gates of Troy, and who beats him back 4 times? The god Apollo. Apollo tells him to go back, and Patroclus semi-retreats. He backs out of Apollo's range, but he doesn't go back to the ships as Achilles instructed him to. And this is the fulfillment of the foreshadowing earlier. When Achilles warned Patroclus not to go to the walls of Troy, he specifically warned him that the god Apollo favors the Trojans. And it's the same god, Apollo, who tells Hector to fight Patroclus. And Apollo tells Hector that he's going to help him. So they fight. Apollo directly knocks Patroclus in the back, strong enough to pop his helmet off and his breastplate off. And while Patroclus is dazed at what just happened, Euphorbus, a Trojan ally, spears him in the back. And then Hector finishes him off. And with his final words, Patroclus sees so clearly the role that he's played in this great game of fate. Struggling for breath, you answered, Patroclus, O my rider. This is Homer again, using that rhetorical apostrophe to directly address the character. Again, it's reinforcing Homer's sympathy to this pawn of a character. And now we get Patroclus' final words. Hector, now is your time to glory the skies. Now the victory is yours. A gift of the son of Cronus. Apollo too. They brought me down with all their deathless ease. They are the ones who tore the armor off my back. Even if 20 Hectors had charged against me, they'd all have died here, laid low by my spear. No, deadly fate in league with Apollo killed me. From the ranks of men, Euphorbus, you came third, and all you could do was finish off my life. One more thing, take it to heart, I urge you. You too, you won't live long yourself, I swear. Already I see them looming up beside you, death and the strong force of fate, to bring you down at the hands of Achilles' great royal son, Achilles. So Patroclus, in this moment of absolute clarity, says, congratulations, Hector, you got me. Not really you, though. It was Zeus's plan to kill me. Then Apollo tore the armor off my back. Then Euphorbus stabbed me. And you came third. And you're doomed too, at the hands of Achilles' royal son. This is significant that Patroclus uses Achilles, Achilles' great-grandfather. He doesn't say Thetis' son. He doesn't say Peleus' son. He says Achilles' son because Achilles is the son of Zeus. So Patroclus is making a clear connection here. He's saying, Hector, the same god, Zeus, who helped you to kill me, is about to kill you. So Patroclus dies, and this begins book 17, and the great battle over his body and Achilles' armor that he's wearing. As is the pattern in the Iliad, the aggressors, in this case the Trojans, want the body to defile it. Hector says he wants the body to feed it to the dogs. And of course, the Argives want to return the body to Achilles, so he can honor his friend with a proper burial. Before Hector enters the battle for Patroclus' body, he first puts on Achilles' armor. And this armor is significant because it's the most unbelievable war prize. It's the armor of the greatest fighter to ever live. It's also significant because this armor was a gift from the gods to Achilles' father Peleus. Zeus watches Hector putting the armor on, and he says, poor soldier, never a thought of death weighs down your spirit now. Yet death is right beside you. You don the deathless arms of a great fighter, and all other fighters tremble before him, true. But you killed his comrade, gentle, strong, and against all rights you ripped the immortal armor off his head and shoulders. So great power for the moment I will grant you to compensate you for all that is to come. Never again will you return from battle, Hector, nor will Andromache take that famous armor, Achilles' deathless armor, from your hands. There's that word again, soldier. Hector is a passenger in Zeus's plan. And Zeus isn't happy that Hector took the armor. He says, against all rights, you ripped the immortal armor. This armor is a sacred object forged by the gods and gifted by them to Peleus, Achilles' father. The fight over Patroclus' body rages all day, and the gods admire the ferocity of this battle. Not even Ares, lasher of armies, not even Athena, watching the battle here, could scorn its fury. Not even in their most savage lust for combat, no. So tense the work of war for the men and chariot teams that Zeus stretched taut across Patroclus this one day. Homer revives here this image of a rope, pulled taut, with a knot in the middle. This word tense reinforces that image, tension in the rope. We saw this image in Book 13, when Homer describes the tension of wills between Zeus and Poseidon, with the armies caught in the knot in the middle. But here, he's saying that it's the Argives on one end and the Trojans on the other. And in this case, it's the body of Patroclus that's caught in the middle. So there's this admirable battle here. But Hector isn't anywhere to be found. Hector has this huge moment of glory in Book 12, when he hurls the boulder at the rampart gates and they splinter open, and he bursts through with this blessed aura of a god. But throughout the Iliad, he's very calculating. When he knows without a doubt that he has the blessing of a god, he charges. Like when he knew Zeus had blessed him to fight to the ships. He has the courage to ignore the omen of the eagle and the serpent, and he presses on across the trench. But when it's just him, just Hector, and he's not blessed by a god or pushed on by a god, he behaves a bit like a coward. When Sarpedon was defeated by Patroclus in Book 16, Hector didn't fight to protect Sarpedon's body or armor, and Glaucus confronts Hector about this. Hector, our prince of beauty, in battle all a sham. That empty glory of yours a runner's glory, a scurrying girl's at that. Glaucus is so angry at Hector that he accuses him of violating the sacred code of Xenia. This is the Greek hospitality culture. He says that Sarpedon was Hector's guest in Troy, and Hector dishonored him by not fighting for his body. And this is a serious accusation in Greece, and it's ironic too, because this whole Trojan War happened because Hector's brother, Paris, violated this same hospitality code, Xenia, when he took away Menelaus' wife Helen, while Paris was a guest in Menelaus' home. This is when we see Glaucus convince Hector to fight for Patroclus' body, because they want to barter for Sarpedon's army. But Hector doesn't even fight himself. He tells the Trojans that he'll split half the spoils of war with whichever man can retrieve Patroclus' body. Hector is actually heading back to Troy while the battle's still going on, and Aeneas shouts to him, "Hector, all you captains of Trojans, Trojan allies, shame, what a shame," clambering back into Troy now, whipped weak with fear by the Argive forces. I think book 17 is a low point for Hector's character. He hides on the battlefield to dress in Achilles' armor, and he rides around in it like an idiot, and the gods see this as disrespectful. He doesn't fight hard for Patroclus' body, and he disrespects his Lycian ally Glaucus after the death of his best friend Sarpedon. And I think Homer makes a really interesting decision here to beat down Hector before he dies. If you're writing a piece of literature or producing a film or telling any kind of story, you have a trade-off to make anytime one character eliminates another. As an author, you have to decide how justified you want that death to be. And I think there's a continuum here. On one end, you can give absolute glory to the victim. This is the Jesus archetype. As a literary character, Jesus is the all-powerful Son of God, and he allows himself to be executed in an act of pure sacrifice. And there are other characters in literature that come close to this archetype of taking absolute glory as the victim, like Ned Stark in Game of Thrones when he's executed by the psychotic King Joffrey, or Harry Potter when he sacrifices himself to the evil Lord Voldemort. The victims are pure good, and the executioners are pure evil. The opposite is to give pure glory to the aggressor. This is the archetype of David and Goliath, when you're rooting for this character to defeat pure evil. And again, you see this one everywhere, with Frodo defeating Sauron in Lord of the Rings, for example. But there are actually two other options, which are much less common. You could have evil versus evil, so two anti-heroes fighting each other. This is rare, but I think the John Wick movies come close to this, right? You wouldn't want to be friends with John Wick or with the people he fights again, so they're both anti-heroes. But I think that this quadrant here is where the Iliad lives. You have two good characters who square off against each other. Hector has shown he cares deeply for his family, and that he's pained by the loss his brother's indiscretion has brought. And these are good qualities. Achilles has shown the most sophisticated philosophy of all the characters in this story. He has the courage to explode the Greek sense of duty and obsession with glory, to take charge of his own life. Despite being bound so tightly by fate, Achilles is the only character in this book who seems free. And again, these are good qualities. But as we spend time with these characters, we see that their weaknesses are flipped. We never once see Hector's judgment clouded by rage, but it's rage that consumes Achilles for 16 books. And we never once see Achilles as cowardly, but this cowardice diminishes Hector in the eyes of gods and men. We all know what's coming for Hector, and it's a good time to take stock of how we feel about it. We have these two characters who are good, and the Greek audience listening to Homer would have seen both of these characters, Achilles and Hector, as good. But I think Achilles is the greater man. Achilles captures the purpose of a man who has chosen to live the life he was fated. In Book 18, Achilles gets the news that his friend Patroclus has perished, and we get this incredible description of his grief. A black cloud of grief came shrouding over Achilles, both hands clawing the ground for soot and filth. He poured it over his head, fouled his handsome face, and black ashes settled onto his fresh, clean war shirt. Overpowered in all his power, sprawled in the dust, Achilles lay there, fallen, tearing his hair, defiling it with his own hands. This grief is the driving force of the poem in these last 6 books. We began the poem with rage, seeing goddess, the rage of Peleus' son. But it's actually grief that's going to pull Achilles into the battle at last. And we'll see a similar description of this grief when King Priam of Troy loses his son Hector. It's the shared grief of these 2 characters, Achilles and Priam, that's going to bring them together in the end. Achilles, in his grief, wails so loud that his mother Thetis hears him from the sea. She comes to him to console him, and she tells him that Zeus delivered what he wanted. Zeus has accomplished everything you wanted, just as you raised your hands and prayed that day. All the sons of Achaea are pinned against the ships, and all for want of you. They suffer shattering losses. I don't think Thetis says this to stick it to her son. She knows he's agonizing over the death of his best friend. But it's important for her to say this because it shows that Zeus has accomplished his aims. He fulfilled his promise that he made to Thetis. This sets up Achilles' next move as a genuine free choice. And the literary point of view matters here. We know from Hesiod's Works and Days that the battles at Troy and Thebes are designed to end the age of heroes, and that this is Zeus's will. And we know from Zeus's plan, which he describes in the Iliad, that his will is for Achilles to slay Hector. So from the omniscient point of view, Zeus's point of view, and Homer's point of view, Achilles is doomed. He told us this in the 2nd line of the poem. But from Achilles' point of view, his next move is a genuine free choice. Thetis just reminded him, you asked Zeus to punish the Achaeans, and he did that. Zeus's promise on this issue has been fulfilled. And Achilles knows that the prophecies say he has 2 fates. He tells Odysseus and the other kings when they come to visit him in the tent in Book 9 that he can fight on to Troy and perish, but achieve unending glory. Or he can sail home and live a long life with no glory. From Achilles' point of view, he has a genuine free choice here. And sensing his vengefulness, Thetis reminds Achilles of the consequence of killing Hector. You're doomed to a short life, my son, from all you say. For hard on the heels of Hector's death, your death must come at once. And Achilles responds immediately, then let me die at once. This is Achilles' choice. And of course, it's motivated by the rage and the grief that he's feeling. What he wants to do more than anything is to avenge his friend Patroclus. And in his choice to slay Hector, he's showing us that he wants this revenge more than he wants life itself. He knows this decision will cost him his life. And he acknowledges the immense power of the anger that's motivating him. If only strife could die from the lives of gods and men, an anger that drives the sanest man to flare in outrage. Bitter gall, sweeter than dripping streams of honey, that swarms in people's chests and blinds like smoke. Just like the anger Agamemnon, king of men, has roused within me now. Achilles is acknowledging here that he's now paid a price for his raging against Agamemnon. He tells us that bitter gall, vindictiveness, when you relish in it, feels sweeter than dripping streams of honey. This is amazing writing, showing us the perversion of the mind, saying that when you're in this rage, what's bitter seems sweet to you. And then Fagel so smartly chooses swarms here, because that completes the metaphor of the honey. The gall tastes sweet as honey, but the danger of it, the swarm, like stinging bees, grows in your chest. Achilles recognizes the grip that anger has over him, and he doubles down on his decision anyways. Homer wants us to know that Achilles is choosing this path of his own free will. For my own death, I'll meet it freely, whenever Zeus and the other deathless gods would like to bring it on. Not even Heracles fled his death for all his power, favorite son as he was to Father Zeus the king. Fate crushed him, and Hera's savage anger. And I too, if the same fate waits for me. It's this powerful paradox again of Achilles choosing his fate. So Achilles tells his mother that he'll go to battle, and he asks her to bring him a new set of armor from the god of fire, Hephaestus. Meanwhile, the battle's still going on outside, and the Trojans are getting really close to taking the body of Patroclus. And the messenger god, Iris, tells Achilles that if Hector gets Patroclus's body, he's going to mount his head on a stick. Achilles can't fight without armor, but he has to do something. So Athena gives Achilles Zeus's shield, the Aegis, this great object of terror with Medusa's head mounted on it. And she gives him a golden flame that shoots from his head into the sky. And this is a blessing from the gods that would have been visible from miles away. And Achilles walks out to the top of the trench and he screams 3 great war cries. And Athena goes to the opposite side of the battlefield and she screams 3 times too. So piercing now the cry that broke from Aeacides. And Trojans hearing the brazen voice of Aeacides. All their spirits quaked, even sleek-maned horses, sensing death in their wind, slewed their chariots round, and charioteers were struck dumb when they saw that fire, relentless, terrible, burst from the proud-hearted Achilles' head, blazing as fiery-eyed Athena fueled the flames. So who is screaming? Achilles, yes. But the name Homer uses is Aeacides. It's that patronymic that means son of Achilles. Now remember, Achilles is Achilles' great-grandfather, the great demigod son of Zeus. And when Patroclus was dying, he was looking up to Hector. Those were his last words, that Hector would be brought down at the hands of Achilles' great royal son. So when Hector sees, from so far away, Achilles with this enormous flame atop his head, and he hears the supernatural war cry from the man, he thinks that this is a son of Zeus who has come for me. This is Achilles' royal son, whom Patroclus told of. And who is fueling this divine flame? Athena, the favorite daughter of Zeus. But it's not gray-eyed Athena, as she's normally described. This is fiery-eyed Athena. It's the warring incarnation of the goddess Athena, which makes her even more intimidating. And the effect of this sight and the war cries drives absolute chaos among the Trojans, and they abandon the fight in fear. Homer tells us 12 of the Trojans' finest fighters died right there, crushed by their own chariots, impaled on their own spears. Up on Olympus, Hephaestus has started work on Achilles' new armor, and we get an incredible, detailed description of the shield that he forges for Achilles. This is an example of the literary ekphrasis, which is a detailed description of an artwork or an object so that we can imagine it in our mind's eye. Homer tells us that the god Hephaestus is creating a gorgeous, immortal work on the shield. That Hephaestus is creating a whole world on this shield. And I want to give you some of this description. There he made the earth, and there the sky, and the sea, and the inexhaustible blazing sun, and the moon rounding full, and there the constellations, all that crown the heavens. So on a portion of the shield he depicts the cosmos. On a second portion he shows 2 noble cities. In the first city he shows a city at peacetime, and all the things that happen in peacetime. Weddings, feasts, singing, dancing. And he shows a fight, and a judge who resolves the fight and upholds this sense of order. And with the second city, we see war, an army surrounding the walls of the city, debating the fate of the people holed up in the citadel. And we see the battle that follows. And we get more of these scenes. And he forged a fallow field, broad, rich plowland, tilled for the 3rd time, and across it crews of plowmen. And he forged a king's estate where harvesters labored, reaping the ripe grain, swinging their whetted scythes. And he forged a thriving vineyard, loaded with clusters, bunches of lustrous grapes in gold, ripening deep purple. Girls and boys, their hearts leaping in innocence, beating away the sweet ripe fruit in wicker baskets. And there among them, a young boy plucked his lyre, so clear it could break the heart with longing, and what he sang was a dirge for the dying year. I think this bit about the vineyard is unbelievable. It has this feeling to it of this immortal Elysian perfection. And he forged on the shield a herd of longhorn cattle, working the bulls in beaten golden tin, lowing loud. And the famous crippled smith forged a meadow, deep in a shaded glen, for shimmering flocks to graze. And the crippled smith brought all his art to bear on a dancing circle, broad as the circle Dactylis once laid out on Knossos' spacious fields, for Ariadne, the girl with lustrous hair. And he forged the ocean river's mighty power, girdling round the outermost rim of the welded, indestructible shield. So how many scenes are there in the shield? There's 9. The same number we've seen throughout the poem. And the last scene is critical, because the Greeks believed that Oceanus is a river which encircles the earth. So if the mighty ocean river encircles the shield, then what's inside it, the preceding 8 scenes, is the totality of the earth. This artwork on the shield is the godly depiction of the human experience. It captures the peace of the countryside, the innocence of youth, the joys of dancing and singing and laughing, and the churn of city life, and the justice and order that keeps us from tearing ourselves apart. This world of war that's consumed Achilles and Hector for the last 9 years is just one small slice of the shield. This description of Achilles' shield is radically different than the only other shield we've dwelled on in this poem, Zeus's shield, the Aegis, which Athena carried into battle in the Aristeia of Diomedes in Book 5. That shield was a divine object of horror. It was imbued with the divine spirits of panic and terror, and it had at its center the terrible head of Medusa, which turns all who look upon it to stone with fear. So why is this shield, Achilles' shield, so different? Homer doesn't tell us for sure, but the obvious message is that Achilles goes to war as an emissary of the gods, to uphold this cosmic balance that's depicted on the shield. And when I hear people say something like this, it's always framed through Achilles' point of view, for Achilles to know that his fated actions have meaning. But Achilles doesn't care about this. He's already chosen his fate. He just wants to slay Hector. I actually think that the shield is more interesting through the point of view of Hector. Achilles is on a mission to slay one man, Hector. Maybe Hector will get close enough to see the detail of the shield. Does Hector need to see the terror and panic of the Aegis? Does he need to be frozen to stone in fear by the face of Medusa? I don't think so. I think the gods recognize that Hector is a good man, and they wouldn't taunt him in his final moments before death. They'd rather show him the importance of his death. Homer doesn't give us any of this. It's my speculation. But I think Achilles' shield is not an object of terror, but an object of catharsis, to remind Hector that his death is in accordance with fate, to uphold the divine order of Zeus, which is depicted on the shield. In Book 19, the armor is delivered to Achilles, and it's so powerful that his Myrmidon warriors can't even look at it. The goddess laid the armor down at Achilles' feet, and the gear clashed out in all its blazoned glory. A tremor ran through all the Myrmidon ranks. None dared to look straight at the glare. Each fighter shrank away. Achilles gets the armor and he immediately wants to go to war. He reconciles with Agamemnon in a very public exchange of speeches in front of all the soldiers. And Agamemnon says he'll throw a feast, But Achilles has no patience for the feast. He's desperate to avenge his friend Patroclus' death. You talk of food? I have no taste for food. What I really crave is slaughter and blood and the choking groans of men. Lovely. In Book 20, Achilles finally marches to battle. He's clad in this bronze armor from Hephaestus that's so supernaturally powerful his own men couldn't even look at it back at their camp. And the Trojans are absolutely terrified. Zeus quickly assembles the gods and orders them into battle to support whichever side they will. And the gods are confused at this, but Zeus tells them that Achilles is too powerful on his own. If Achilles fights the Trojans, unopposed by us, not for a moment will they hold his breakneck force. Even before now, they'd shake to see him coming. Now, with his rage inflamed for his friend's death, I fear he'll raise the walls against the will of fate. So we know throughout the poem that Zeus's will is for Achilles to slay Hector. But Zeus fears that Achilles will also destroy the walls of Troy. And that is not his destiny, because we know Achilles will die before Troy falls. So back on the battlefield, we get this description of the Trojans shaking in fear. Chilling tremor shook the Trojans' knees down to the last man, terrified at the sight. The headlong runner coming, gleaming in all his gear, a fire like man-destroying Ares. And as the Trojans are staring at Achilles, shaking in fear, they hear this supernatural scream from behind him, so loud and piercing and fantastical. It's what we'd imagine today as a dragon scream. But it's actually something much worse. It's the goddess Athena who's formed behind Achilles to spur him on. And if you're a Trojan right now, you're probably pissing yourself until from behind you, you hear a different scream, as loud as Athena's, but deeper. And for a moment, you think you're surrounded. But then you're elated because you realize it's a man killing Ares, the god of war. And he's formed behind you to spur you on. And like the greatest superhero battle ever imagined, Hera, Hermes, and Hephaestus all form with the Achaeans. Leto, Apollo, Aphrodite, and the river god Xanthus all assemble with the Trojans. And just as this cosmic battle is about to break out, you hear this cracking sound of enormous thunder from the skies above and violent shaking of the earth below. And even the gods on the battlefield look up and down in fear. It's the brothers Zeus and Poseidon. Down from the high skies, the father of men and gods let loose tremendous thunder. From down below, Poseidon shook the boundless earth and towering heads of mountains. The whole world quaked. The slopes of Ida, with all her springs and all her peaks, and the walls of Troy and all Achaea's ships. And terror struck the underworld. Hades, lord of the dead, cringed and sprang from his throne and screamed shrill, fearing the god who rocks the ground above his realm. Giant Poseidon would burst the earth wide open now, and lay bare to mortal men and immortal gods at last the houses of the dead, the dank, moldering horrors that fill the deathless gods themselves with loathing. So immense the clash as the war of gods erupted. So Poseidon is shaking the earth so violently that his brother Hades in the underworld thinks the crust of the earth is going to crack open above his head. And while the soldiers are wondering what in the world is happening, Achilles is streaking towards Hector, and Apollo needs to slow him. Apollo appears to Aeneas, the Trojan prince, and encourages him to confront Achilles. Aeneas won't do it. He says Achilles is blessed by the gods, and it would be crazy to confront him now. And Aeneas says this, which we'll come back to later. Even without that power of the gods, his spear flies straight to the mark, never stops, not till it bores clean through some fighter's flesh. Aeneas fears the power of Achilles' spear, the heavy spear that only Achilles can wield, that he throws so hard it bores clean through the flesh of a fighter. But Apollo eggs Aeneas on. He tells him, "Hero, why not invoke the deathless gods yourself? They say you're a son of Aphrodite, Zeus's daughter, but Achilles sprang from a lesser goddess's loins." Apollo's asking, "Aeneas, what's all this complaining about? About Achilles being blessed by the gods? You're the son of Aphrodite, who's far more powerful than Thetis because Aphrodite is a daughter of Zeus. And this is enough to motivate Aeneas to the battle. And in no man's land between the two armies, Aeneas comes forth to challenge Achilles. And Achilles is so politically smart with what he says to Aeneas. Aeneas, why so far from your own ranks, standing all exposed? Does your courage really drive you to challenge me? In hopes of ruling your stallion-breaking friends and filling Priam's throne? Even if you killed me, Priam would drop his crown in your hands? For that? The king has sons. He's sound of limb, no half-wit either. Rhetorically, this is so good from Achilles. He's starting the speech by asking Aeneas if he's confused. Aeneas, are you lost? Why are you so far out ahead of your soldiers? Or wait, do you think you can really challenge me? He's mocking Aeneas and stoking his fear. And then he takes advantage of the audience that's watching them in this confrontation. And Achilles says to Aeneas, surely the only reason you challenge me is because you have your heart set on sitting on Priam's throne. And this is a huge accusation because Aeneas is from a different branch of the family of Priam. So for Aeneas to rightfully sit on that throne, a whole lot of people need to die. This is why Achilles says the king has sons. And he reminds everyone that Priam is still alive. He's sound of limb. And in this light, Achilles is making Aeneas' ambitions seem treasonous. He's sowing discontent among the Trojans in their attitude towards Aeneas. But Aeneas is still burning with the confidence from Apollo. And he says, enough taunting. And he throws his spear, and Achilles easily stops it in the shield from Hephaestus. Then Achilles throws his spear, the heavy spear of Pelian ash given to his father, Peleus, by the great centaur, Chiron. And Achilles throws it so hard, and the spear is so heavy, that it blasts straight through Aeneas' shield and sticks in the ground behind him. And this is exactly what Aeneas said he feared to Apollo. Remember, he said, even without that power of the gods, his spear flies straight to the mark, never stops, not till it bores clean through some fighter's flesh. This time, it bores through his shield, but it just as easily could have been Aeneas' flesh. This is an unbelievable fear that Aeneas feels as he recognizes this. And Homer tells us that this fear blinds Aeneas. And as Aeneas and Achilles each draw swords, Poseidon decides to intervene, even though Poseidon despises Troy because he was cheated out of payment when he constructed its walls. And even though the Trojans killed his own demigod grandson earlier in the poem, he still saves Aeneas because Poseidon knows it's the fate of Zeus that Aeneas will carry on the Trojan people after Priam dies and Troy falls. So Poseidon strides into the battle, sets the heavy spear back at Achilles' feet, and he flings Aeneas up into the skies and out of harm's way. Achilles knows the gods have interfered to save Aeneas, but he's so in tune with fate, he doesn't fight it. He's just happy to keep raging on across the battlefield, slaying any Trojan who would cross his path. And there's a mania to Achilles fighting across the battlefield that I find really funny. He sees Hector close up and he shouts to him, "Quick, charge me, the sooner you meet your death." He's just begging for the fight. And he chases down another Trojan, and the Trojan turns to face Achilles, and Achilles blurts out, "Who on earth are you? Where do you hail from? You with the gall to go against my onslaught." And he hacks that guy down and chases this group of Trojans into the river Xanthus. And the image Fagles gives us here in translation is of Achilles whirling in the river, insane to hack more flesh. He takes 12 Trojans captive from the river to offer as human sacrifices in honor of Patroclus. And he corners one of Priam's sons, Lycaon, who begs for his life. And Achilles talks to him with such confidence. "Come, friend, you too must die. Why moan about it so? Even Patroclus died, a far, far better man than you. And look, you see how handsome and powerful I am? The son of a great man, the mother who gave me life, a deathless goddess. But even for me, I tell you, death and the strong force of fate are waiting. And this sets up the defining moment of Book 21. Achilles, in his rampaging, has slaughtered so many Trojans in the river that the river takes the shape of a man and calls out to Achilles to stop polluting the river with corpses. The river's personified. And Achilles, like a madman, draws his sword and jumps from a bluff into the water to fight the river. And he gets pounded by the river over and over again. So the relentless tide kept overtaking Achilles. Yes, for all his speed, gods are stronger than men. Again and again, the brilliant, swift Achilles whirled, trying to stand and fight the river man to man, and see if all the immortal gods who rule the vaulting skies were after him. Achilles knows he can't win, but he fights like a dog against the river anyways. And he's calling up to the gods as he's doing it, saying that this is a test. If Achilles is really fated to slay Hector, the gods won't let Achilles drown at the hands of the river. And sure enough, Poseidon, Athena, Hera, and Hephaestus all come to his aid. And Hephaestus, the god of fire, lights a huge blaze around the river, and the river begs for mercy. And this is wildly entertaining to Zeus, who watches from above. Zeus heard the chaos throned on Olympus's heights and laughed deep in his own great heart, delighted to see the gods engage in all-out conflict. And this feeling from Zeus captures the sport of fighting between the gods. I get the sense that Zeus is letting the gods blow off some steam here and support their favorite mortal men on the battlefield. Because Zeus has to balance the cosmos, the desires of gods and men. And this is a big opportunity to let each god have a moment of honor, so long as it doesn't affect Achilles slaying Hector. And the gods have their fun, but they're mindful to not seriously harm each other. When Hephaestus surrounds the river Xanthus with his flames, Hera calls him off after Xanthus begs for mercy, saying, it wouldn't be right for the gods to harm each other for a mortal, even a man as great as Achilles. And Apollo says something similar when he comes up against Poseidon on the battlefield. God of the earthquake, you'd think me hardly sane if I fought with you for the sake of wretched mortals. Like leaves no sooner flourishing, full of the sun's fire, feeding on the earth's gifts, than they waste away and die. Stop. Call off this skirmish of ours at once. Let these mortals fight themselves to death. Again, Apollo's implying here a hierarchy, that it's not worth it for the gods to come to blows over any mortal man. Because for the immortal gods, the lifespan of any man is just an instant. The Homeric simile here of the leaves shows man flourishing in the sun, so full of life, then so quickly wasting away and dying. So the battle continues, and Achilles and the Achaeans beat the Trojans all the way back to Troy, so badly that the Trojans retreat into the walls of the city, except one man, Hector. And this brings us into Book 22, the battle we've all been waiting for between Hector and Achilles. Now this battle is very strange for us as modern readers because we know the outcome. Achilles is going to slay Hector. And as a climax of the story, it's completely different from any modern novel or film that we would encounter. When we think of a great modern story, we think of a climax in which anything could happen. It's this type of suspense that keeps us on the edge of our seats. But because fate plays such a decisive role in the Iliad, the joy for us isn't seeing what happens, it's in seeing how the characters react. So in Book 22, Achilles races towards Hector, and Hector panics and tries to run. And this reinforces the cowardice that we've seen at different places throughout the poem. Hector does turn to face his fate. Honor compels him. He knows he can't go inside the walls after running away from this fight. He'll take a stand and fight his best. But of course, the outcome is fated. Athena disguises herself as one of Hector's friends and comes to him, saying that they'll fight Achilles together. But when Hector turns to his friend mid-battle, the friend is gone, and Achilles realizes he's been tricked by the gods. And right here, with his last words, when he realizes that he's a victim of fate, he begs for the sanctity of his body. I beg you by your life, your parents, don't let the gods devour me by the Argive ships. Wait, take the princely ransom of bronze and gold, the gifts my father and noble mother will give you. But give my body to friends to carry home again, so Trojan men and Trojan women can do me honor with fitting rites of fire once I'm dead. We've seen this all throughout the poem, the importance of recovering the body. We saw it with Sarpedon. We saw it again with Patroclus. Homer gives us these two episodes to reinforce that this is really important. It's really important to honor your dead. And those prior episodes about the sanctity of the body set up this payoff, which is Achilles' response. Beg no more, you fawning dog, begging me by my parents. Would to God my rage, my fury would drive me now to hack your flesh away and eat you raw. The savagery of the words, to eat you raw. Achilles has given his life to exact this revenge. There's no bargaining with him. He's bent on defiling the body. So he lashes it up and drags it behind his chariot around the walls of Troy. And a thick cloud of dust rose up from the man they dragged, his dark hair swirling round that head so handsome once, all tumbled low in the dust, since Zeus had given him over to his enemies now to be defiled in the land of his own fathers. In Book 23, we're back at the Achaean camp for the burial rite of Patroclus. Patroclus still had not been buried because Achilles insisted on exacting revenge on Hector before he sent his friend away to the underworld. So the Achaean kings build an enormous funeral pyre and cremate Patroclus, and his remains are placed in a tomb. And Achilles hosts funeral games, sporting events, as a way to celebrate with the other kings of Achaea. This episode gives us some comic relief after the tension of all the fighting that we'd seen up to this point. And we get to see Achilles at peace. He still mourns his friend, but he's freed of the rage that had consumed him up till now. First, against Agamemnon, and second, against Hector. And this is a glimpse of the princely Achilles. We get a feeling here of the great man he could have become as king of Theia had he sailed home and inherited his father's throne. That would have been the other fate that he could have chosen. The greatest test of this graciousness comes when they're holding a spear throwing competition and King Agamemnon wants to participate. And Achilles jumps in to say, Atrides, well we know how far you excel us all. No one can match your strength at throwing spears. You're the best by far. Take first prize and return to your hollow ships. This bit gives us a final resolution in Achilles' relationship with Agamemnon. Now in Book 24, the gods of Olympus are growing angry at the desecration of Hector's body. They've been enchanting it to preserve it from decaying, and Aphrodite has been fighting off the dogs and the birds. But each time Achilles is overcome with grief, he drags the body of Hector with his chariot through the dirt in circles around Patroclus' grave. He's still grieving, and this is the theme of Book 24, grief. So Zeus orders that Achilles must give Hector's body back to whichever Trojan comes to ransom it. And Achilles agrees immediately. As we've seen throughout the poem, he doesn't defy Zeus. And we cut to Priam back in Troy, and we see he's been in the most unbelievable grief. He hasn't eaten in 12 days since his son Hector died, and he's wallowing on the floor. Smeared on the old man's head and neck, the dung lay thick that he scraped up in his own hands, groveling in the filth. And even after the messenger god Iris tells Priam that he can go ransom his son's body, we see him very emotionally unstable. He's no longer behaving like a king. All sense of decorum is gone. As he's on his way out of the gates, there are onlookers, his own citizens, and he lashes out at them. You think it nothing, the pain that Zeus has sent me. He's destroyed my best son. You'll learn too, in tears. Easier game you'll be for Argive troops to slaughter. Now my Hector's dead. But before I have to see my city annihilated, laid waste before my eyes, oh, let me go down to the house of death. There's a pettiness to this. Him telling these normal citizens, who I'm sure have honored him for years, that they'll be easy game for the Achaeans now that Hector's dead, and that King Priam won't be here to see Troy get annihilated. This is not reassuring to hear if you're a Trojan citizen. But he's clearly in total anguish, because next, he lashes out at his remaining sons, who are helping him to manage the cart that's stacked with all the ransom. Get to your work, my vicious sons, my humiliations. If only you'd all been killed at the fast ships instead of my dear Hector. This instability that we're seeing from Priam heightens the stakes, because it doesn't seem that he has his wits about him. And despite the assurances from the gods that Achilles will comply and give over the body, this is a risky move for Priam to go get the body himself. This very old man, Priam, going alone behind enemy lines to sneak into the tent of grief-stricken Achilles. One wrong word, if he has one outburst at Achilles, just like he had against his citizens and his sons, Priam may never return home. The messenger god, Hermes, helps Priam to sneak behind enemy lines, past the different outposts, but Priam has to go the last bit on his own. He comes inside Achilles' lodge, which is described as this great room, and there's one seating area with some of the Myrmidon captains, and off on the other side is Achilles, at the dining table, finishing the last of his evening dinner and drink. And this is when Priam enters the room. The majestic king of Troy slipped past the rest, and kneeling down beside Achilles, clasped his knees and kissed his hands, those terrible, man-killing hands that had slaughtered Priam's many sons in battle. Awesome, as when the grip of madness seizes one who murders a man in his own fatherland and flees abroad to foreign shores, to a wealthy, noble host. And a sense of marvel runs through all who see him, so Achilles marveled, beholding majestic Priam. His men marveled too, trading startled glances. But Priam prayed his heart out to Achilles. Remember your own father, great godlike Achilles, old as I am, past the threshold of deadly old age. My Hector, it's all for him I've come to the ships now, to win him back from you. I bring a priceless ransom. Revere the gods, Achilles. Pity me in my own right. Remember your own father. I deserve more pity. I've endured what no one on earth has ever done before. I put my lips to the hands of the man who killed my son. This is a big scene. So Priam comes in the room, and before anyone can notice he's there, he's already on the floor, clasping Achilles' knees. And this is the same gesture we saw from Thetis in Book 1, when she went to Zeus to ask him to bring honor to her son. It's the greatest gesture of honor for the Greeks. It's what someone does when they must beg of someone who's much more powerful than them. And he kissed those hands, those terrible man-killing hands. Priam is kissing the very things that took his son's life. And this description here of man-killing, it's intentional. Man-killing is the epithet that's used for Ares, the god of war. He's often called man-killing Ares. This is an acknowledgement from Priam of the power of Achilles. He has the hands of the god of war. And this raises the stakes of the meeting. Will Achilles turn those man-killing hands on Priam? And then we get a description here of the sense of awe and the marvel of seeing an all-powerful king like Priam, so far outside his city walls and reduced to such a low status, begging on the floor, wrapping his arms around Achilles' knees. There's this moment where the men in the room realize who that is on the floor, and they look at each other incredulously. And again, The depth of writing here is unbelievable because this whole scene hinges on Achilles seeing Priam like his own father, Peleus. And when Homer describes the marvel of seeing Priam in that room, so out of place, he makes a comparison to an exiled king who murders a man in his own fatherland and flees abroad to foreign shores. This comparison isn't accidental. Achilles' father Peleus committed 2 separate murders and went into exile 2 different times. Homer's setting up here that Achilles would recognize the marvel of King Priam, so out of place in this tent. And imagine what it must have felt like to see his own father in a foreign land begging for mercy. Priam knows he's vulnerable, so he cuts off any aggressive thoughts Achilles might be having. He says, "Remember your own father, old as I am." He's telling Achilles to treat him as he would want his own grieving father to be treated. And he tells Achilles to revere the gods. Achilles honors the gods, and he wants Achilles to remember that Zeus instructed him to give the body back. And this last image we're left with here is one of the most famous lines in the poem. "I've endured what no one on earth has ever done before. I put my lips to the hands of the man who killed my son." It's the ultimate plea for sympathy. And it works. We get Achilles' reaction. Those words stirred within Achilles a deep desire to grieve for his own father. Taking the old man's hand, he gently moved him back. And overpowered by memory, both men gave way to grief. Priam wept freely for man-killing Hector, throbbing, crouching before Achilles' feet. As Achilles wept himself, now for his father, now for Patroclus once again. And their sobbing rose and fell throughout the house. And then Achilles speaks. "Poor man, how much you've borne. Pain to break the spirit. Come, please, sit down on this chair here. Let us put our griefs to rest in our own hearts. Rake them up no more, raw as we are with mourning. What good's to be won from tears that chill the spirit? So the immortals spun our lives, that we wretched men live on to bear such torments. The gods live free of sorrows. There are 2 great jars that stand on the floor of Zeus's halls and hold as gifts. Our miseries in one, the other blessings. When Zeus, who loves the lightning, mixes gifts for a man, now he meets with misfortune, now good times in turn." Achilles is gracious here to Priam. He invites him up to the chair, and he says it's time for them to stop grieving, because there's nothing good to come from this grieving, from these tears that chill the spirit. As with everything else, the sorrow that they're feeling is fate. Achilles tells us that fate comes from these 2 great jars that Zeus pulls from to mix the gifts of man. And this is a powerful word, gifts. Misery from one jar, blessings from the other, but both of them gifts. It's the theme of the poem, the equanimity of embracing your fate. Achilles asks the women of the camp to prepare Hector's body for King Priam to take back to Troy. And Achilles and Priam feast. And at the end of that feast, we get this beautiful moment between these 2 men. Both of them brought here under the most terrible of circumstances. Both of them grieving the loss of their loved ones, doomed by fate. Both of them, Achilles and Priam, doomed to die next themselves. But each of them chooses to make this moment good. Priam, the son of Dardanus, gazed at Achilles, marveling now at the man's beauty, his magnificent build. Face to face, he seemed a deathless god. And Achilles gazed and marveled at Dardan Priam, beholding his noble looks, listening to his words. All right, I hope this guide's been useful to you and that you get as much joy out of this ancient epic poem as I've gotten from it. Next month, I'm going to do an in-depth guide on Homer's Odyssey ahead of the release of the Christopher Nolan film in July. Last thing, I'm publishing this guide to the Iliad on Mother's Day in the US. because this video is dedicated to my mom, Sandra, who taught me how to read and who's going to use this guide for her first reading of the Iliad. Mom, I hope you enjoy the poem. And to any mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Thank you.